Chapter 23:15. While everyone was still in a daze, Ji Tianxing and Master Tong fought again. Ji Tianxing waved the Heaven Barrier sword and slashed out a huge starry sword that covered the sky and earth. It crisscrossed and attacked Lord Tong. Master Tong swung his walking stick horizontally and unleashed 3 blue light waves that were 1,000 feet tall. They swept out like huge waves. Bang, bang, bang. The starry sword clashed with the blue light waves and created 3 earth-shattering sounds. The berserk energy exploded, shaking the tall mountains on both sides of the canyon. Cracks appeared on them, and countless rocks collapsed. Ji Tianxing didn't move at all, but Master Tong was pushed back 10 steps. His wrinkled face flushed red. Before he could suppress the Dharma power in his body, Ji Tianxing pressed forward and slashed down with the Sword of Burial of Heaven. Heavenly Dragon Slash. Ji Tianxing roared furiously as he swung his sword and slashed out a huge sword that was 3,000 meters long. Master Tong was trying to suppress the Dharma power in his body. Seeing the giant golden sword slashing towards him, he quickly waved his walking stick to block it. Jiang Qi, Tuoba Da, and Helian Wuzhua didn't stay idle either. They quickly used their secret techniques to help Master Tong fight against Ji Tianxing. The 3 of them were arrogant and didn't like each other. They were always bickering and didn't like each other. But at this critical moment, the 3 of them abandoned all other thoughts and attacked Ji Tianxing with all their might. Yin Yao also brandished her silver moon dual swords. Cold stars filled the sky as she blocked the attacks of the 3 young martial saints. The 2 sides fought fiercely in the canyon and used their secret techniques. Light flashed everywhere and loud sounds shook the sky. Boom! Bang, 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 bang. Suddenly, the canyon was in chaos and the sky was filled with colorful lights. The violent and raging energy fiercely impacted the canyon and the mountain ranges on both sides, sending countless rocks and dirt flying, splashing up dust that covered the sky and covered the sun. The 6 groups of martial artists nearby quickly retreated away from the center of the battlefield to avoid being injured by the aftershocks. The battle between the martial sacred realm experts lasted for 15 minutes. After exchanging a few hundred blows, the outcome of the battle was gradually decided. Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao's hair was messy, and their white clothes were stained with blood. Their faces were pale, and their magic power was greatly exhausted. However, the situation of Master Tong, Jiang Qi, and the other 3 was even more miserable. Master Tong's hair was disheveled, and his gray linen clothes had been torn into rags. There were several hideous wounds on his chest and back. Jiang Qi's sword box dimmed, and the azulate swords trembled as their light flickered. He was covered in blood. His face was covered in blood, and there was a bowl-sized hole in his chest. One could vaguely see his dark red heart. One of Tuoba Da's legs had been cut off, and there was a foot-long wound on his waist that almost cut him in half. Helian Wuzhua was also covered in sword wounds, a total of 18 wounds so deep that his bones could be seen. There was a hideous wound on the right side of his face, and blood kept gushing out. Half of his face was about to fall off. However, he was proficient in artifact refining and alchemy, so he had already taken some healing pills to suppress his injuries. The 2 sides were still fighting. Suddenly, Ji Tianxing seized the opportunity to find Master Tong's weakness and used his trump card without hesitation. God-killing spear. He raised his left hand, and golden flames surged out of his palm, forming a golden spear that was more than 10 feet long. He thrust it toward Master Tong. Swish! The spear turned into a golden light and shot across the sky, arriving in front of Master Tong. Master Tong's expression changed drastically. His eyes widened in shock, and his eyes were filled with fear. He wanted to teleport away, but it was too late. He tried to block the attack with his black walking stick, but it was useless. Boom! Amidst a thunderous boom, the god-slaying spear pierced through his chest. His thin and weak body suddenly exploded, turning into thousands of pieces that flew in all directions. A faint golden god soul flew into the distance amidst the pieces of flesh and blood that filled the sky. Ji Tianxing had destroyed the body of Master Tong, who was at the half-step to martial god realm. Such a terrifying scene immediately filled all the spectating cultivators with fear, cold sweat dripping down their backs. Jiang Qi, Tuobada, and Helian Wuzhua were terrified. Their eyes were wide open, and the battle intent in their hearts dissipated. They knew that they were no match for Ji Tianxing. With Master Tong, an expert, present, they had their backbone, and they had dared to think about how to kill Ji Tianxing. However, Master Tong had been defeated, and his body had been destroyed by Ji Tianxing. Their confidence was destroyed, and they turned around to escape without hesitation. Swish, swish, swish. The three of them flew as fast as they could. They followed Master Tong's divine soul and flew toward the end of the valley. They were different from ordinary martial sages, and they did not want to say anything to regain their dignity, because they knew very well that they would only be asking for humiliation, and it was meaningless. Since they had been defeated, it was more important to escape. Tantai Xian who had been watching the battle in the sky, stared at Ji Tianxing in disbelief. She was the most shocked and in disbelief. She knew that Ji Tianxing was not as powerful as he was now at the northern battlefield of the Luo Shui Holy Kingdom. In comparison, Ji Tianxing was 20 times more powerful than he had been at that time. She could not imagine what Ji Tianxing had gone through. How could his strength have increased 20 times in a year? However, she quickly came to her senses. She took a deep look at Ji Tianxing, and then she turned around to escape in a hurry. She followed Jiang Qi, Tuobada, and the others and flew toward the north. After a few breaths, Tantai Xian, Jiang Qi, and the others disappeared into the horizon. The deep and dark valley gradually became peaceful again. Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao stood outside the cave. They put away their swords and took a few elixirs. Within 100 miles, the several groups of dumbfounded martial artists gradually came to their senses. Everyone broke out in a cold sweat, and their hearts were filled with fear and awe. After witnessing Master Tong's body being destroyed, they finally realized that Ji Tianxing's strength was infinitely close to the divine realm. It was extremely terrifying. They did not dare to have any more fantasies. They all quietly retreated dozens of miles, for fear that Ji Tianxing would vent his anger on them. At this moment, Yin Yao turned her head to look at Ji Tianxing beside her and asked, "We fought just now. Those three young martial saints are all descendants of ancient aristocratic families. One is proficient in the sword principle, one is proficient in refining Dharma treasures, and the last one has combined the soul of 10,000 beasts with martial arts. Can you tell if they're assassins under someone's orders, or if they're your enemies from back then?" Ji Tianxing frowned and thought for a moment. Then he nodded and said, "If I am not wrong, they should be the disciples of the three big hidden sects. They're the three big families that have existed for tens of thousands of years. They used to live in seclusion in the Star Moon Cave and were quite mysterious." Chapter 23:16. I see. Yin Yao nodded and asked, "It seems like this is a conspiracy and it has something to do with martial god Tianju. However, I don't understand. The three aristocratic families and martial god Tianju are enemies. Why would they want to assassinate you? As the old saying goes, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Shouldn't they join hands with you to deal with martial god Tianju?" Ji Tianxing shook his head and smiled. "That makes sense, but it's not absolute. If martial god Tianju has some deal with the three aristocratic families, and both sides have reached some kind of cooperation, then it's not surprising that they want to assassinate me." Yin Yao understood his meaning and didn't ask anymore. Ji Tianxing glanced at her and teased with a smile. "That's all you have to ask? You don't have anything else to ask?" "What else?" Yin Yao asked in confusion. Ji Tianxing said with a playful smile, "Under normal circumstances, you should ask me who that woman is and how we know each other. What's our relationship?" Yin Yao rolled her eyes at him and pretended to be angry. "Do you think I'm that kind of secular woman who is jealous of a man? I know, and trust your character and conduct the best. Although that woman is beautiful, she's too seductive and flirtatious. Judging from her demeanor and temperament, she was most likely a woman who had many subordinates under her skirt. You don't even have the interest to look at such an impure woman. How could you have anything to do with her? Ji Tianxing looked at her gently and held her hands. He said with a sincere tone, "As expected, the person who understands me the best is you. There are many things that I don't need to say, and you can understand." Yin Yao nodded and said with emotion, "Aku and you have 2 lives of love. She has never regretted it and even died for you once. However, you married me. You didn't want me to be sad, so you kept rejecting her and would rather hurt her. If I didn't play the matchmaker and resolve the knot in your heart, I don't know how much you would hurt her. Even a woman like Aku, who is loyal to you, you kept rejecting her. How could those common women of the pugilistic world enter your eyes? I'm even sure that other than me and Aku, you'll never fall in love with a third woman in your life." Ji Tianxing thought about it seriously and nodded in agreement. "Yes, you're right." Yin Yao rolled her eyes at him and said with a smile, "All right, let's hurry up and break the formation." The commotion caused by the battle just now was too great. It would definitely attract many martial sages over. I'm afraid this place will soon become lively, and when that happens, there will be more dangers. Ji Tianxing nodded and didn't say anything else, continuing to crack the array formation. Yin Yao held the silver moon twin swords and stood by his side to protect him. She vigilantly monitored the surroundings. Unknowingly, an hour had passed. Ji Tianxing broke the 3rd multicolored light barrier and activated the 4th seal. Meanwhile, deep in the mountains 30,000 kilometers away from the Grand Canyon, in the belly of a 3,000-meter-tall mountain, Jiangqi, Tuoba and Tantai Xian were hiding in a dark and gloomy cave. Other than Tantai Xian, the 3 of them were covered in blood. They were badly injured and their combat abilities were severely reduced. The most miserable one was Master Tong, whose physical body had been destroyed. He was only left with a ball of divine soul, which floated in the dark cave, flashing and dimming. Jiangqi's face was full of hatred. He clenched his fist and hit the rock in front of him. He cursed in a hoarse voice, "Damn bastard. He's so young. How could he have such terrifying strength?" Helian Wuzhua healed his injuries and nodded. Even if he started cultivating when he was in his mother's womb, he has only cultivated for 20 years. How could he reach the half-step to divine realm? In the past 10,000 years, there is definitely no one else like him who reached the peak of the martial sage realm in 20 years. He's not human. He's definitely a god. Master Tong's voice came out from the flickering divine soul. He's the reincarnation of a god. How can we judge him with common sense? We underestimated him and didn't believe the legends on the continent. Now, it seems that he's even more powerful than the legends. Master Tong's voice was low and hoarse, full of fatigue and regret. He was already very old and had no hope of reaching the martial god realm. Now his physical body was destroyed. Even if he spent 100 years to rebuild his physical body, it would not be as good as before. Tuoba did not interrupt. He frowned and pondered. After a while, he turned to look at Tantai Xian and asked in a low voice, "Xian, you knew Ji Tianxing long ago and knew how powerful he was. Why didn't you tell us earlier?" Tantai Xian sneered and said calmly, "You must have forgotten that I've reminded you 4 times that Ji Tianxing is not an ordinary martial sage. You must be careful. However, you were too arrogant and completely ignore my words. Now that you've lost, you're blaming me?" Seeing that she was angry, Tuoba quickly explained, "Xian, don't misunderstand. I'm not blaming you. I just think you should have told us earlier that you knew him." Sigh. He wanted to explain, but found that he could not. No matter what, he was blaming Tantai Xian. Tantai Xian did not hide her disdain. She sneered and said, "What you need to do now is not to feel sorry and regret. If you can't kill Ji Tianxing, you can't take back Xingyue Wonderland. You're all seriously injured and can't recover in a short time. The only way now is to contact Yi Lu Shui and act with them. That's the only way." Jiangqi frowned and said reluctantly, "We're in such a mess now. Why should we go to Yi Lushui? Let him see us as a joke and mock us wantonly?" Helian Wuzhua also shook his head and said, "Let's heal for a few days first. We'll talk about it after we've recovered." Only Master Tong said earnestly, "Miss Yen is right. What we need to do now is to meet Yi Lushui. Ji Tianxing is very powerful and has extraordinary means. I'm afraid he'll break the seal of the secret land soon. If we heal for a few days, he'll have entered the secret land by then." Jiangqi and Tuoba still wanted to refute, but Master Tong ordered in a dignified tone, "You don't have to say more. Follow my orders. Tonight, you'll heal your wounds and try to cover them. Tomorrow morning, you'll meet Yi Lushui and follow his orders. Of course, when I'm not with you, you'd better be smart and be careful." Hearing this, Jiangqi and Tuoba frowned and asked at the same time, "Master Tong, you're not going with us?" Chapter 23:17. For hours passed. It was midnight. Heaven and earth were as dark as ink, and the canyon was dead silent. Ji Tianxing finally cracked the fifth seal. As the blue defensive light shield dissipated, the seal at the entrance of the cave was completely removed. Ji Tianxing stopped and exhaled a long breath of turbid air. He had taken the first step to success and was very close to the illusory void secret realm. "Let's go in." He led Yin Yao into the cave and walked along the dark tunnel. The cave was slanted downwards and extended deep into the ground. About 10,000 feet deep, there was a huge five-colored light screen that sealed the entire cave. Ji Tianxing and Yin Yao could both sense that the colorful light screen was emitting a powerful divine power. Without a doubt, that was the real seal of the illusory void secret realm. It was a genuine god-level array. The two of them crossed the 10,000 feet long tunnel and came onto the five-colored light screen. Ji Tianxing stared at the five-colored light screen and used the God's Eye mystic technique to observe it carefully. Yin Yao took out a light red elixir from her spatial ring and handed it to Ji Tianxing. "Tianxing, you've been deciphering the array formation all this time, and you've even fought a few battles. Not only did you use up a lot of magic power, but your soul is also very tired. Take this elixir first to recover your soul and magic power. Then, you can study the seal of the secret realm." Ji Tianxing thought for a moment, then took the pill and swallowed it. This was because his divine sense had detected that there were a few more groups of martial artists in the canyon. In the past 4 hours, another 5 groups of martial artists had arrived and were hiding around the entrance of the cave. He had to maintain an abundant amount of magic power and a clear and powerful soul to be able to guard against any possible danger. After taking the elixir, he sat cross-legged on a rock and regulated his breathing for 2 hours. The elixir's effect was immediate. It restored his magic power to its peak, and his mental state was more energetic. He then stood up and looked at the 5-colored light screen, carefully observing and studying it. At the same time, more than a dozen groups of warriors in the canyon were whispering to each other. The next few waves of experts were basically martial sages from the 3 divine kingdoms. They considered themselves to be of high status and powerful, so they wanted to fly to the cave entrance. However, they had only flown a short distance when they were stopped by other martial saints. "Brother, please don't be impulsive. The entrance to the secret realm has already been occupied." "Who? Who is so reckless as to occupy the entrance to the secret realm?" "It's Ji Tianxing." "Oh, so it's him. Damn it, why is he here? With his status and means, I don't think Marshal God Nangong's cave abode is good enough for him." You don't know this, but there were a few groups of martial saints who clashed with Ji Tianxing. All of them were severely injured by him and fled in a sorry state. Among them was a half-step martial god with a hunchback whose body had been destroyed by Ji Tianxing. Moreover, Ji Tianxing is arrogant, despotic, and ruthless. If you go up against him now, you're just looking for death. Thank you for your reminder, brother. If other martial saints had occupied the entrance, we would still stand chance. Since Ji Tianxing is here, we can only retreat. Don't provoke that murderous god. Don't, brother, don't be discouraged. Even if we can't defeat Ji Tianxing, we won't fight him head-on. We can wait here. Maybe there's still a chance? You're right. Let's wait and see. Similar conversations continued to take place in the canyon. When the new martial saints heard that Ji Tianxing had occupied the entrance to the secret realm, they did not dare to say anything. Some even wanted to retreat. However, after being persuaded and instigated by others, they all decided to stay. No one was willing to give up on Marshal Godnangong's cave abode. They were still hoping that a miracle would happen. Unknowingly, a night had passed. In the canyon outside the cave, a total of 18 groups of martial artists had gathered. There were more than 20 martial saints and more than 10 martial lords. Inside the cave, Ji Tianxing was still standing under the colorful light screen. He stared at the light screen, observing and deducing the formation. He was so immersed in it that he almost forgot about the passage of time. In the morning, the sun rose from the east. White mist lingered between the mountains. Under the golden sunlight, it shone like a fairyland. Jiangqi, Tuobada, and Tantai Xian came out of the cave and flew up into the sky. After a night of rest and treatment, their injuries had stabilized. They still had 70% of their strength. Especially their external injuries, they were much better after treatment. The three of them tidied up their clothes and hair. They looked more normal than last night. Master Tong had left last night. In order to avoid unnecessary trouble, Master Tong returned to the North Sea in a low-key manner. Only Jiangqi, Tuobada, and the other two stayed to carry out the mission. After yesterday's setback, they were not confident. They had lost their drive and fighting spirit. Where are we going to find Yi Lushui? Helian Wuzhua looked at the rising sun with a gloomy face. What's there to find? Tuobada muttered in annoyance. Just send him a message and arrange a place to meet him. Jiangqi nodded in agreement. He took out a jade slip and sent a message to Yi Lushui. After waiting patiently for 15 minutes, they received Yi Lushui's reply. A beam of light flew from the sky and landed in front of Jiangqi. He quickly picked up the jade slip and read the message with his divine sense. After reading it, his expression changed slightly. He frowned unhappily. Helian Wuzhua and Tuobada looked at him and asked, Jiangqi, what did Yi Lushui say? What did he say we should meet? Is there a problem? Jiangqi put away the jade slip and said expressionlessly, Yi Lushui said he has more important things to do and won't meet us. But he asked us to wait near the entrance and work with the first deity, Yuanzhen. Tuobada and Helian Wuzhua frowned and muttered with displeasure. First deity Yuanzhen? Is he the eldest son of martial god Tianju? I heard he's a despicable person with a bad reputation. I think he was taught a lesson by Ji Tianxing. How strong is that guy? Do you have any intelligence or wisdom? Does he know how to plan? Don't tell me he's an ignorant and incompetent second generation. If he dares to act all high and mighty, I'll definitely beat him up. Jiangqi sighed and said, This mission is a deal between the three aristocratic families and Tianju divine nation. It's not something you and I can control. At this point, we can only follow orders. Who dares to disobey? Even if Yuanzhen is a good-for-nothing, we have to follow him and protect him. Yi Lushui said that since we failed, we'll be responsible for protecting Yuanzhen. As long as Ji Tianxing dies, we'll have completed the mission and Xingyue Cave will be returned to us. Chapter 23:18. Thousands of miles away from the canyon, there was a lonely peak that was thousands of feet tall. Jiangqi, Helian Wuzhua, and Tuobada were standing under a towering ancient tree, waiting quietly. The sun rose to the middle of the sky. The sunlight shone through the dense leaves and fell on their faces. They were clearly impatient. About a quarter of an hour later, a few streaks of multicolored light flew over from afar. Swoosh! Swoosh! The flowing lights landed on the peak a few hundred feet away from them. Jiangqi and the others looked over and saw four well-dressed young men and women with extraordinary auras. The leader was a young man with a tall stature. He wore a golden robe and a crown on his head. His pale face carried a hint of arrogance. Jiangqi, Tuobada, and the others immediately guessed that the man in the golden robe was Yuanzhen, the first divine prince of heaven and holy nation. Following behind Yuan Jun was a young man in a green robe with a sword on his back. Jiang Qi, who practiced swordsmanship, always paid more attention to martial artists who practiced swordsmanship. He looked at the man a few more times. The other two were young and beautiful women. One wore a pink dress and looked charming. The other wore a yellow dress and looked dignified and beautiful. There were 4 people on each side, and they were all young martial saints. Naturally, both sides stared at each other silently, sizing each other up from head to toe. Seeing that Yuan Jun and the others did not intend to speak, Jiang Qi and Tuoba looked at each other. Then, Jiang Qi led the others to greet them. He stopped in front of Yuan Jun and the others and smiled. "I am Jiang Qi, the young master of the Jiang family. Greetings to the first divine prince. I am Tuoba, the young master of the Tuoba family. Greetings to the first divine prince. I am Helian Wuzhua, other than Tantai Xian'er." The other 3 all said their names. But Yuan Jun's reaction was very calm. He only nodded slightly and looked at Tantai Xian'er. Even though he had seen many beautiful women, he still could not hide his surprise when he saw Tantai Xian'er for the first time. He looked at Tantai Xian'er for a long time. Chao Ying's eyes dimmed when she saw this. Seeing Yuan Jun's reaction, Tuoba felt even more disgusted with him. He even felt a trace of enmity. Mother asterisk Kerr, I've already guessed it. What bullsh asterisk T, great divine son. He's definitely just an embroidered pillow. I didn't think that not only is he arrogant and cold, he even dares to stare at Xian'er. This brat definitely has designs on Xian'er. I have to guard against him. Thinking of this, Tuoba reached out his arm and held Tantai Xian'er's waist. He had a smile on his face as he spoke to Yuan Jun. "Your Highness, I'm really sorry. I forgot to introduce earlier. This is my wife, Lin Xian'er." Yuan Jun was astute, so how could he not see through Tuoba's intentions? Immediately, a playful smile appeared on his face, and a trace of disdain flashed through his eyes. He withdrew his gaze from Tantai Xian'er, pointed to the 3 young men and women behind him, and introduced them to Jiang Qi and others. "Since we're going to work together, I will introduce them to you. This was Marshal Saint Qing Shan, the youngest Saint Emperor of the Heaven and Divine Nation. Is this Chun? Marshal Saint, this is Marshal Saint Chaoing. It will be more convenient for us to act after we get to know each other." Jiang Qi, Tuoba, and the other 2 clasped their hands and bowed to Marshal Saint Qing Shan and others. Everyone greeted each other and exchanged some pleasantries. After everyone had quieted down, Yuan Jun then said in a serious tone, "I won't waste any more words. Everyone just needs to understand that we only have one goal in this operation, and that is to kill Ji Tianxing at all costs and by all means." After saying that, Yuan Jun glanced at Jiang Qi and others and said in a cold tone, "Before the operation, Commander Yi told me that if we invited the experts of the 3 aristocratic families, there would be no mistakes. However, I didn't expect the 3 aristocratic families to be so perfunctory and send a few young martial saints. Moreover, you have already acted on your own and confronted Ji Tianxing head-on and lost to him." Hearing this, Jiang Qi, Tuoba, and the other 2's expressions changed. A strong sense of humiliation surged from their chests, and there was a hint of anger on their faces. Qing Shan and Chun, the martial saints, and the others looked at them with half-smiles, and there was a hint of mockery at the corners of their mouths. The atmosphere suddenly became awkward. Helian Wuzhua was more tactful, and he nodded with a smile. "You are right, Sir Divine Child. We have indeed underestimated the enemy in this operation. We have lived overseas for a long time, and we do not understand the situation in Shenwu Continent. We also did not expect Ji Tianxing to be so monstrous, which is why we have suffered such a great loss. However, since Commander Yi has come to us, he must have known that he is no match for Ji Tianxing. That is why he needs us to work together to complete the mission." What he meant was that they could not defeat Ji Tianxing because they did not understand the situation and had underestimated the enemy. However, Yi Lu Shui and his group could not defeat Ji Tianxing either. Otherwise, Why would he ask them for help? In any case, none of them could defeat Ji Tianxing, so why should they laugh at each other? It would be better for everyone to work together to deal with Ji Tianxing. Completing the mission was the most important thing. Yuan Zhen, Qing Shan Martial Saint, and the others understood the meaning behind Helian Wujua's words and could not help but look at him deeply. Yuan Zhen continued, Helian Wujua is right. I hope that all of you will remember that Ji Tianxing is not an ordinary martial saint. He is second only to the martial gods. Perhaps you have been trapped in the North Sea for a long time and have become frogs in a well. Now that you have suffered a loss, you should learn a lesson. From now on, you must not underestimate the enemy and listen to my orders. Otherwise, I can only ask you to leave, and there is no need to mention the Zingluna cave again. Everyone finally understood that these words were the main point. Yuan Zhen's previous words were just a prelude. This was his true motive. Jiang Qi, Tuoba Da, and Helian Wujua all frowned, and anger flashed in their eyes. However, the three quickly suppressed their anger and humiliation and remained calm and rational. There was nothing they could do. They had already failed once and had no right to bargain with Yuan Zhen. Seeing that the three of them remained silent, Yuan Zhen let out a satisfied smile and waved his hand. If there are no objections, we will depart now. After saying that, he took the lead and flew into the sky, leading everyone towards the canyon. A distance of 10,000 miles was not far for them. A short half an hour later, the group arrived at the Grand Canyon. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The group passed through the white clouds and stopped in the sky outside the cave, observing the surroundings from above. Within 100 miles of the cave, there were more than 10 groups of martial artists hiding. Most of them were martial saints. Inside the cave, there were flashes of colorful lights and violent waves of dermic power. Yuan Zhen, Jiang Qi, and the others looked and saw Yun Yao standing in the cave, holding two swords in a defensive posture. Ji Tianxing, on the other hand, was casting spells to break the seal with all his might. Chapter 23:19. Yuan Zhen frowned when he saw what was happening in the cave. Damn bastard! How dare he break the 5 seals at the entrance of the cave? How dare he try to break the divine seals in the illusory, void mystery land? As he cursed in a low voice, a cold glint flashed in his eyes. His killing intent was obvious. Jiang Qi wanted to suggest that they attack when Ji Tianxing was breaking the seals. However, he recalled what Yuan Zhen had said before and decided to keep quiet. Marshal Saint Qing Shan thought for a while and said to Yuan Zhen, Your Highness, look at the dozens of people hiding in the valley. They are all intimidated by Ji Tianxing. No one dares to attack. Now that Ji Tianxing is trying his best to break the seals, it is the best time for us to attack him. Marshal Saint Chenyu nodded in agreement. That's right, Your Highness. This is the best opportunity. Moreover, once we attack Ji Tianxing, the martial saints hiding in the surroundings will take the opportunity to attack him. Even if Ji Tianxing has 3 heads and 6 arms, he will not be able to fend off the attacks of so many martial saints. Yuan Zhen frowned. After thinking for a while, he shook his head. This plan will not work. Firstly, we don't have enough people. We must wait for Lord Yi to come and join forces. Secondly, Ji Tianxing has just started to break the seals. He has not consumed much dermic power and is still very powerful. When he breaks the seals and uses up all his dermic power, he will be at his weakest. That will be the best time for us to attack him. At that time, he will be a fish on the chopping board. We can do whatever we want to him. So, we have to wait patiently. After he finished speaking, Yuan Zhen revealed a confident smile. Marshal Saint Qing Shan and Marshal Saint Chenyu both nodded with admiration. So, Your Highness has a plan? No wonder you are so confident. Is it because of our negligence? Your Highness is so thoughtful and has a flawless plan. Jiang Qi, Tuoba Da, and the others rolled their eyes in secret when they saw this scene, and they muttered in their hearts. What kind of *T plan is this? You call this a flawless plan? These two flatterers are so shameless to please Yuan Zhen. Yuan Zhen is indeed an idiot surrounded by a bunch of sycophants and flatterers. Only Marshal Saint Chao-Ying did not express her opinion. She seemed to be deep in thought. After pondering for a moment, she asked Yuan Jun, "Your Highness, the seal of the illusory void secret realm is a divine grade formation. Can Ji Tianxing break it?" Yuan Jun sneered. With his martial sage realm strength, he shouldn't be able to break the deity grade seal. But don't forget his true identity. So, even if he breaks the seal, you don't have to be too surprised. Regardless of whether or not he can break the seal, he will exhaust all of his magic power and become weak. That will be the time of his death. Chao-Ying nodded and said nothing more. Marshal Saint Qingshan said to everyone, "Then let's follow the First Highness' wishes and wait patiently for an opportunity. Everyone, keep quiet. Don't make any noise and wake up Ji Tianxing." Of course, Chao-Ying and Chun Yu would listen to him. Jiangxi and the other two couldn't be bothered to meddle in other people's business, so they all maintained their silence. As for Tantai Xian she had the attitude of an outsider from beginning to end and had no intention of interfering. Ji Tianxing had been casting spells for 18 hours without any rest. Although he looked normal, his forehead was covered in sweat, and he had used up 30% of his magic power. He was mentally exhausted, and his progress in breaking the seal had reached a temporary impasse. After a few failed attempts, he had no choice but to stop casting spells temporarily. He stopped casting spells and stared at the 5-colored light screen. He frowned and fell into deep thought. At this moment, Yun Yao, who was not far away, looked at him with concern. She sent a voice transmission. "Tianxing, don't be so anxious. Take a rest first. There are more than 100 martial artists outside. We have to be extra careful." Ji Tianxing nodded. He turned around and sat down beside her. He took an elixir to recover his magic power. As he refined the elixir, he said to Yun Yao, "Equipment forging and formation Dao complement each other. Martial God Nangong is proficient in forging divine artifacts, and his attainments in formation Dao are profound. The illusory sky's secret realm is his cave residence. The divine formation that seals the secret realm was set up by him with all his knowledge. Even if I am proficient in thousands of divine formations and can deduce the way to break this formation, it will still take me 4 to 5 days to open it." Yin Yao nodded to show that she understood. She asked with concern, "What if I help you and we work together to break it? How many days will it take?" Ji Tianxing thought for a while and answered, "About 3 days." Yin Yao turned her head and looked at the sky outside the cave. She said with a worried expression, "If we work together to break the formation, we will give those people a chance. Unless we chase those martial artists away, we won't have a chance." Ji Tianxing also understood this point. He looked outside the cave with a serious expression. He released his divine sense and extended it out of the cave to check the situation around him. He wanted to see how many martial artists were hiding in the valley and how many martial saints were among them. The invisible divine sense spread out in the valley and soon covered a radius of 200 miles. Ji Tianxing immediately found that there were 19 groups of martial artists around him. There were more than 70 martial saints. Among them, a group of people immediately attracted his attention. There were 8 people in that group, and they were all martial saints. When he used his divine sense to see the appearance of the 8 martial saints, he was stunned. Yuan Jun, martial saints Qing Shan and Chun Yu, and Tantai, Xian and the 3 disciples of the aristocratic families? Ji Tianxing murmured in a low voice. He immediately revealed a mocking smile. "Haha, the people of the 3 aristocratic families are indeed manipulated by the heaven extinction divine nation. They are actually with Yuanjun. 8 martial saints gathered together. Are they trying to sneak up on me while I am breaking the seal?" As he spoke, he stood up and walked out of the cave. Yin Yao quickly followed him and asked with concern, "Tianxing, there are many martial artists in the valley now. Are you really going to attack in public?" "Of course," Ji Tianxing said without hesitation. "Isn't this a good way to make an example of them and scare off the flies in the surroundings?" After he spoke, he turned into a beam of golden light and flew out of the cave. He rushed into the sky as fast as lightning. Whoosh! With a flash of golden light, Ji Tianxing entered the clouds and appeared before Yuan Jun and the others. Yuan Jun, Jiang Qi, and the others were waiting patiently, looking bored. No one expected that Ji Tianxing, who was breaking the seal in the cave, would suddenly appear before them. When everyone recovered their wits, they were startled. They all showed vigilant and guarded expressions and subconsciously took a few steps back. Ji Tianxing looked at Yuan Jun with a mocking expression and said with a cold smile, "Yuan Jun, you are already notorious. Your name has spread throughout the continent. You still have the face to come out?" Chapter 23:20. Hearing Yuan Jun's words, Ji Tianxing's sneer deepened. "What's the big deal with being humiliated? Since you don't know what's good for you and still dare to seek revenge from me, I'll give you another word." "What word?" Yuan Jun asked subconsciously. "Die." Ji Tianxing shouted coldly. A black light flashed in his right hand, and the sword of burial of heaven appeared. In the next moment, he waved the sword of burial of heaven without any explanation, stabbing a cold light that filled the sky towards Yuan Jun. Yuan Jun had already overestimated Ji Tianxing. However, he had not expected that Ji Tianxing would be so unbridled even with 7 martial sages behind him, killing him at the slightest disagreement. He was simply too arrogant and condescending. Yuan Jun's anger and killing intent surged to the heavens. Without hesitation, he drew his sword and waved it to block. Clang! 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 The sword lights that filled the sky collided. The two swords clashed, and a clear and crisp sound of collision burst forth. An incomparably violent force attacked, shaking Yuan Jun and sending him flying backward on the spot. His complexion was as pale as paper. At the same time, the 3 martial saints, Qing Shan, Chun Yu, and Chao Ying, all let out angry roars, brandishing their swords and sabers as they charged towards Ji Tianxing. "Audacious thief, hand over your life." "Ji Tianxing, I want your dog life. Since you're courting death, we'll fulfill your wish." In a split second, the overwhelming radiance of blades and swords, as well as the colorful brilliance of spells, drowned Ji Tianxing's figure like a monstrous flood. Paragon's sword body. Ji Tianxing was fearless. His entire body lit up with black light, and his body turned into a huge black vortex. Swish! Swish! The saber lights and sword shadows that filled the sky fell into the vortex and were immediately swallowed up. In the next moment, the attacks of the 3 martial saints disappeared into thin air, and Ji Tianxing appeared unscathed. Not only did the 3 of them fail to injure him, they were even refined into magic power for his own use. 7-star sword. Ji Tianxing angrily roared again, waving the burial of heaven sword and thrusting out 49 sword beams, enveloping Qing Shan, Chun Yu, and Chao Ying. The 3 of them were shocked. They hurriedly brandished their swords and sabers, casting spells with all their might to resist. But it was futile. Pung, pung, pung. A series of muffled sounds rang out, and the 3 of them were sent flying by the starry sword light. The 3 of them had suffered heavy injuries. There were at least 4 or 5 wounds on their bodies, all of which were so deep that their bones could be seen. The most miserable one was Martial Saint Qing Shan. His entire left leg was chopped off, and he let out a heart-wrenching scream. After repelling the 3 with a single sword strike, Ji Tianxing charged at Yuan Jun with his sword in hand. Jiang Qi, Tuobada, and Helian Wuzhua could not just stand by and watch. They had no choice but to step forward. The 3 of them each performed their own unique skills, controlling 2 swords, 1 cauldron, and 2 millstone axes, charging towards Ji Tianxing with an imposing aura. However, a cold starlight flew over from the side, blooming into thousands of starlight sword flowers. "Your opponent is me." As the silver sword flowers bloomed, Yun Yao's clear and cold voice rang out, echoing in the sky. Pung, pung, pung. Another series of muffled sounds rang out, reverberating in the valley. The violent force exploded, dispersing the clouds and mist within a radius of 100 miles. Jiangqi, Tuobada, and Helian Wuzhua had not recovered from their injuries, so they were still weak. After exchanging a blow, they were actually pushed back 1,000 feet by Yun Yao. Their aura was also stagnant. Before they could regain their composure, Yun Yao waved her silver moon dual swords and launched an attack at them. Therefore, the three of them could only focus on dealing with Yun Yao's fierce attacks with all their might. Ji Tianxing took this opportunity to attack Yuan Zhen. Heaven's splitting sword. Ji Tianxing held the sword of burial of heaven with both hands and slashed out 1,000 feet long starry sword, descending from the sky. Before the giant sword arrived, the terrifying sword intent had already locked onto Yuan Zhen's divine soul, filling him with terror and fear. He knew that he could not block the giant sword's attack, so he hurriedly retreated while wielding his sword to block. Not far away, Qing Shan, Chao Ying, and Chen Yu rushed over, but they were too late to help. Kaboom! Amidst the thunder-like explosion, Yuan Zhen's sword light was shattered, and the 1,000 feet long giant sword landed on him. Suddenly, the golden robe and soft armor he wore shattered into countless pieces and scattered in the sky. He was also sent flying, and a 2-foot-long wound appeared on his chest, spurting out a large amount of blood. If it were not for his dermic power shield and soft armor that blocked part of the power, he would have been cut in half by the giant's sword. After flying 15 miles, he barely managed to stop. His face was full of pain, and fear flashed in his eyes. He could not care less about roaring and cursing, and hurriedly channeled his energy to suppress his injuries. However, Ji Tianxing did not spare him. He was determined to kill him, so he attacked again with his sword. Yuan Zhen, you can go die now. Ji Tianxing roared. He raised the burial of heaven again and slashed down. Another giant sword, which was thousands of feet long, formed by 5-colored lightning, drowned Yuan Zhen's figure with endless divine power. Yuan Zhen was heavily injured, and he was suppressed by the giant sword's power. He could not dodge at all. He was about to be killed by the giant sword. At this critical moment, a light yellow figure flew in from the side and blocked in front of him without any regard for its own safety. Bang! A deafening muffled sound burst out, echoing endlessly in the canyon. The slightly thin and weak light yellow figure was split in half by the giant sword on the spot, and blood splattered all over the sky. Yuan Zhen was also pushed back by the violent impact, and he rolled and crashed into a cliff 10 miles away. Even though his injuries were worse, and he was in so much pain that his body twitched, he forgot about the pain. However, he had completely forgotten about his pain. His eyes were bloodshot as he stared at the 2 halves of the corpse falling from the sky. When he saw the corpse's appearance, his body stiffened, and his expression became extremely ugly. It was Marshal St. Chao Ying. It was that quiet, elegant, and dignified woman. Yuan Zhen knew that Chao Ying had feelings for him for a long time. However, he did not take Chao Ying seriously and had never responded to her advances. He was the great divine son of the heavens and holy nation, and the future ruler of the holy nation. How noble was his status! Chao Ying was only a descendant of a hidden sect, and her beauty was only above average. She was not a beauty, nor was she a noble figure from a prestigious family. How could she be worthy of him? However, Yuan Zhen did not expect that the person who saved him when his life was hanging by a thread would be Chao Ying. It was not Marshal Saint Qing Shan, who was most loyal to him, or Marshal Saint Chen Yue, who respected him greatly. It was the most silent and ordinary Chao Ying. At that moment, Yuan Zhen realized his mistake, and his heart was filled with deep regret. However, it was too late. Chao Ying's corpse fell quickly into the valley and was buried by the ruins. Her white spiritual soul was severely injured, and it was unconscious, floating in the air like a cloud. Yuan Zhen woke up immediately and rushed to the spiritual soul crazily, muttering, "No, Chao Ying is not dead. Her spiritual soul is still here. I can't let her die. I can't." At that moment, he used all his strength to rush over and held Chao Ying's spiritual soul in his hands. Then, he turned around and ran away without hesitation. Chapter 23-21. Marshal Saint Qingshan and Marshal Saint Chunyue were filled with fear after witnessing Chao Ying's body being destroyed. When they saw Yuan Jun running away, they followed him subconsciously. However, what Yuan Jun said before leaving instantly caused their bodies to stiffen, and their expressions became extremely unsightly. Their thoughts of running away were extinguished on the spot, and their hearts were filled with despair. Yuan Jun's words were not a request, but an order. If they dared to disobey, with Yuan Jun's nature, he might really kill them. However, they were both subjects of the heaven and divine nation, and they could not go against Yuan Jun. After hesitating for a moment, they could only accept their fate. Even if they braced themselves and were prepared to die, the two of them could only face Ji Tianxing head-on and unleash their strongest attacks. One sword breaks Qingshan. Flying flowers fill the sky. Marshal Saint Qingshan waved his sword and slashed out a giant green sword that could split heaven and earth, charging toward Ji Tianxing. Marshal Saint Chunyue's sleeves fluttered, and pink flowers covered the sky. They surrounded Ji Tianxing like a rain of flowers and exploded. They knew Ji Tianxing's strength very well, and they did not dare to hope that these two secret techniques could injure or kill Ji Tianxing. They only hoped to delay him for a moment. As long as they could cover Yuan Jun's retreat, their mission would be completed. Bang! 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 Ji Tianxing waved his sword and slashed out hundreds of sword lights, shattering the rain of flowers. He then raised his left hand and threw out a star-shattering fist, shattering the giant green sword. In the blink of an eye, Marshal Saint Qingshan and Marshal Saint Chunyue's attacks were easily neutralized. Then, he waved the Burial of Heaven sword and slashed out a giant sword made of five-color divine lightning. Kaboom! With a thunderous explosion, the giant sword of lightning hit Marshal Saint Qingshan. Marshal Saint Qingshan was instantly wrapped by the five-color divine lightning, and his entire body was charred black. Black smoke rose in spirals, making him look like a piece of charcoal. The incomparably violent impact caused his entire body to split open and spurt out pitch-black, filthy blood. His entire body flew backward, drawing an arc in the sky before crashing into the ruins 30 miles away. Marshal Saint Chunyue saw Marshal Saint Qingshan being severely injured with her own eyes. She was so shocked that she forgot about Yuan Jun's order. Without hesitation, she turned around and flew towards the northwest. However, Ji Tianxing did not let her go. He waved his left hand and shot out a dazzling golden light. Heaven capturing dragon claw. The golden light that covered the sky condensed into a giant dragon claw that was the size of a mountain. It descended from the sky and enveloped Marshal Saint Chunyue. Marshal Saint Chunyue was horrified. She tried her best to teleport away, trying to escape the dragon claw's attack. However, the space within a radius of dozens of miles had been sealed. She couldn't teleport at all. Boom! Amidst the deafening muffled sound, Marshal Saint Chunyue was ruthlessly slammed by the heaven-capturing dragon claw. She spat out a mouthful of blood as she crashed into the ruins, causing dust to fill the air. Her body was covered with cracks and wounds, like a broken porcelain bowl. Dark red blood gushed out from dozens of wounds, drenching her entire body. Endless dust enveloped her, making her look extremely miserable. In just a few breaths' time, Qingshan and Chunyue were defeated and heavily injured. Both of them were powerless to stop Ji Tianxing. They could only endure their injuries and crawl out of the ruins, fleeing towards the two sides of the canyon. Ji Tianxing wanted to chase after Yuan Jun. However, he had already wasted 10 breaths' time in order to deal with Qingshan and Chunyue. Now, when he went to chase after Yuan Jun again, he couldn't even see his shadow. Helplessly, he could only give up on chasing after Yuan Jun and vent all his anger on Qingshan and Chunyue. Seeing Marshal Saint Qingshan fly across the sky, wanting to take the opportunity to escape, he stabbed out a few starry sword lights without hesitation. 7-star sword. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. 7 starry sword lights streaked across the sky and instantly pierced the charred Marshal Saint Qingshan. At the moment of life and death, a determined look flashed across Marshal Saint Qingshan's eyes. He immediately made up his mind and took out a huge, dark golden battle flag, blocking in front of him like a wall. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The incomparably sharp starlight sword light pierced the golden battle flag one after another, cutting the huge battle flag into a dozen pieces. This battle flag was Marshal Saint Qingshan's trump card, a high-grade sacred artifact with special effects. He rarely used it. Now that it was a matter of life and death, he could only reluctantly take it out. The result was just as he expected. The battle flag blocked the sword lights, but was torn into pieces. Fortunately, Marshal Saint Qingshan dodged the calamity. His strong desire to survive caused him to erupt with unlimited potential, and his fleeing speed increased by 2 times. Whoosh! In the blink of an eye, he traversed hundreds of miles of sky and disappeared into the depths of the clouds. Ji Tianqing didn't chase after him. Instead, he turned and attacked Marshal Saint Chenyu. Marshal Saint Chenyu's injuries were very serious. After barely escaping 400 miles, Ji Tianqing caught up with him. Piercing sword. Ji Tianqing held the Heaven's Burier sword and pierced through the air, aiming directly at Marshal Saint Chenyu's back. Marshal Saint Chenyu's divine soul was instantly locked by the terrifying sword will. Her body also became stiff. Her eyes were filled with despair. She had a premonition that death was coming. However, she wasn't as lucky as Marshal Saint Qingshan. She also didn't have a powerful trump card. Her ending was already decided. Bam! With a muffled sound, a cold light pierced through Marshal Saint Chenyu's back and exploded in her chest. A huge silver mushroom cloud rose into the sky, illuminating the canyon for hundreds of miles. Marshal Sacred Chenyu's body was shattered into pieces on the spot, which fell from the sky into thousands of pieces. Even her divine soul had been blown into dozens of pieces, floating in the air like white spots of light. Marshal Saint Chenyu, who had charmed countless nobles and experts and had countless men under her skirt, died just like that. Ji Tianqing didn't even bother to look at her. He turned and attacked Jiang Qi, Tuoba De, and the others. The 3 descendants of the aristocratic families were attacking Yun Yao. They were actually in a stalemate and wouldn't end in a short time. Of course, Yun Yao had the upper hand. She wasn't injured at all. On the other hand, Jiang Qi, Tuoba De, and Helian Wujua's injuries became more serious and their powers became weaker. Ji Tianqing rushed to the battlefield and glanced at the sky 100 miles away. He saw Tantai Xian standing on top of a huge rock on the cliff and watching the fight from afar. She acted as if this matter had nothing to do with her and was just watching the fire burn across the river. She had no intention of interfering. Seeing this, Ji Tianqing's sharp eyes became gentler. If Tantai Xian dared to attack Yin Yao, he would never let her go. Heaven-breaking sword. While Jiang Qi and the other 2 were fighting with Yin Yao, Ji Tianqing suddenly teleported behind Tuoba De and slashed with his sword. The huge golden sword that was 100 feet long descended on Tuoba De's head with the power to destroy everything. Tuoba De was taken aback. His eyes were filled with fear. Chapter 23-22. Bam! Amidst the deafening noise, the huge golden sword struck Tuoba De's double axes. The 2 axes were sent flying, and the giant sword was also shattered. Tuoba De was sent flying, and his back collided with Yun Yao's dozens of sword auras. Swoosh! Swoosh! In the blink of an eye, dozens of bloody holes appeared on his back, and blood splattered everywhere. The sudden pain made him roar into the sky, and he let out a blood-curdling scream. Before he could stabilize his body, Ji Tianqing slapped another huge golden palm at him. Bam! Tuoba De was hit by the golden palm, and he was sent flying dozens of miles away. He crashed into the cliff at the edge of the valley, and rocks were sent flying everywhere. Jiang Qi and Helian Wujua saw that Ji Tianqing had joined the battle and severely injured Tuoba De in one move, and they wanted to retreat. Both of them made a feint, and after forcing Yin Yao to retreat, they ran as fast as they could. Ji Tianxing quickly chased after them and punched at Helian Wuzhua and slashed at Jiang Qi with his sword. Both of them had no choice but to cast spells to block. Bam! Bam! With a dull thud, both of them were sent flying, and they spat out blood as they crashed into the ruins. Before they could recover, Yun Yao attacked again with her sword, and hundreds of sword auras were sent flying. Swish! 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 Jiang Qi and Helian Wuzhua were infuriated. They could only endure their injuries and take out their Dharma treasures to block. The purple and green dual swords and an octagonal golden cauldron flew out, shining brightly, and blocked in front of them. The sword auras pierced the dual swords and the golden cauldron, and a series of crisp sounds were heard. Cling! Clang! Clang! After an intense collision, the purple and green dual swords and the golden cauldron dimmed, and they fell in front of the two weakly. At this moment, Ji Tianxing attacked again and sent out dozens of golden sword auras. Even though Jiang Qi and Helian Wuzhua tried their best to block, they were still stabbed a few times, and a few bloody holes appeared on their bodies, and blood splattered everywhere. The two of them knew that they couldn't stay here any longer. Otherwise, they would have to endure the continuous attacks of Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao. They would be killed within a few moves. As a result, the two of them made up their minds and used all their strength to activate the azulate swords and octagonal golden cauldron to attack Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao. While the couple was casting spells to defend themselves, the two of them turned around and fled without hesitation. 2 breaths later, Ji Tianxing broke the twin swords while Yun Yao shattered the octagonal golden cauldron. The broken sword and the fragments of the golden furnace fell from the sky and smashed into the canyon. However, Jiang Qi and Helian Wuzhua had already escaped far away. Even if Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao chased after them, it would be very difficult for them to catch up in a short period of time. The couple then looked at the ruins 100 miles away. They wanted to kill the heavily injured Tuoba Da unexpectedly. Tuoba Da had already fled under the cover of Tantai, Xian'er, and vanished without a trace. As a result of the 7 martial saints that Yuan Jun brought, other than Chun, the martial saint was killed on the spot. Chao Ying's physical body was destroyed, and the other 5 escaped. Ji Tianxing furrowed his brows and said angrily, "Damn it, I wanted to kill them all, but I didn't expect them to escape." Yun Yao put away the twin swords and comforted him with a calm expression. "If you insist on chasing after any martial saints, you can definitely catch up and kill them. However, if you do that, not only will you waste time, you will also put yourself in danger. When we were fighting just now, the dozens of martial saints around us were a little restless. Fortunately, we defeated Yuan Jun and the rest easily, so those people were intimidated. Look, those dozen or so groups of martial artists are very fearful and have all retreated to a further place." Ji Tianxing looked around for a moment and found that those martial saints had indeed retreated and stopped looking at them. Yun Yao continued, "You don't have to worry. This result is quite good. Yuan Jin's people are either dead or injured, and they have all fled. They won't be able to come back in a short time. When they recover from their injuries and come back for revenge, we will have broken the seal and entered the secret realm. When we get martial God Nangong's treasures and divine weapons, killing them will be as easy as flipping our hands." Ji Tianxing nodded and said, "Yes, it seems like this is the only way now. Yuan Jun's people have all fled, and the surrounding martial saints are also intimidated. They won't dare to attack us again. Now that the situation is settled, I can break the seal with peace of mind." Then, he turned and flew back into the cave. He took out some medicinal pills and consumed them to recover his magic power. Yun Yao landed beside him and also consumed some medicinal pills to recover her magic power. 6 hours later, the two of them had refined the medicinal power, and their magic power and mental state had both recovered. Then, the two of them began to work together to break the seal. Although the divine level seal was strong, Ji Tianxing was familiar with thousands of divine level formations and had already deduced the way to break it. Yin Yao helped him wholeheartedly. She started to cast spells according to his instructions and shot out streaks of dazzling light. The two of them were so focused on casting spells to break the seal that they completely forgot about the passage of time. Unknowingly, 2 days had passed. Although the two of them had been breaking the seal, the martial saints in the valley were too intimidated and didn't dare to have any evil thoughts. Even an expert like Yuan Zhen, who had led 7 martial saints to besiege Ji Tianxing and his wife, had still ended up with heavy casualties. Among the martial saints in the valley, who dared to come to their deaths. Soon, another day had passed. For 3 whole days, Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao had been focused on breaking the seal and hadn't rested at all. The two of them had consumed a lot of their spiritual energy and magic power. Their faces were pale, and beads of sweat appeared on their foreheads. However, the 5-colored light curtain had become thinner, and its light was also gradually dimming. Success was right in front of them. No matter how tired they would grit their teeth and persevere. Finally, on the evening of the 4th day, the 5-colored light curtain that sealed the cave completely disappeared. Whoosh! The 5-colored light quickly shrunk until it completely disappeared, and the cave was instantly plunged into darkness. Ji Tianxing had successfully broken the illusory, void, secret realms deity seal. Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao slowly stopped and looked at each other with gratified smiles. Phew! I underestimated this sealing formation. Even after 4,000 years, it still retains 70% of its power. It's really not simple. President Ji Tian heaved a sigh of relief and lamented. Yun Yao raised her hand to wipe away the sweat on her forehead and said expectantly, "In the current Shinwu continent, besides the 3 martial gods, you are the only one who can successfully break a deity seal. If we can obtain a powerful deity weapon, we will be qualified to compete with the martial gods." Ji Tianxing nodded and smiled. "I wonder what martial god Nangong's cave looks like. What treasures are hidden inside? Let's go in and take a look." As he spoke, he took out the sword of burial of heaven and led the way into the depths of the cave. Yin Yao held her silver moon swords and followed closely behind him. She was always on guard against their surroundings. Although martial god Nangong's cave might contain deity weapons and treasures, it was still very likely that the cave would contain deity weapons and treasures. Chapter 23:23. At first, Ji Tianxing thought that martial god Nangong's cave abode was a ruin buried deep underground. But later, he realized that wasn't the case. At the end of the cold and dark cave was a starlight disk with a radius of 10 feet. It was a teleportation array that led to an unknown place. There were hundreds of intersecting golden light lines in the disk, which divided it into 365 cells. Every grid was of the same size, and all of them were surging with white starlight, constantly flickering. Ji Tianxing knew that the disk was the heavenly cycle stellar disk, which corresponded to the stars in the sky and contained the secrets of the heavenly cycle stellar disk. If one wasn't a martial god, they wouldn't be able to study it thoroughly, let alone set it up and use it. Even a martial god would have to spend hundreds or thousands of years to understand the secrets of the heavenly cycle stellar array and open or close it. Fortunately, Ji Tianxing was knowledgeable and his memory was as vast as the sea. He had also mastered the secrets of the heavenly cycle stellar array to an extremely high level. After all, the heavenly cycle stellar array was the foundation of many divine arrays. Yao Yao, wait here for a while. I'll be able to crack this teleportation array soon. He warned Yun Yao, and then began to cast a spell to break open the formation. Yun Yao took a few steps back and guarded Ji Tianxing with the silver moon swords while secretly recovering her Dharma power. Swish, swish, swish. Ji Tianxing put away the sword of burial of heaven and formed a sword art with both hands. He kept shooting out silver sword auras into the heavenly cycle stellar array. Suddenly, the starlight disk started to move. The 360 cells flashed with starlight and kept changing their positions. This divine formation contained boundless profundities. It contained over 99,000 transformations, and it was extremely complicated and profound. But Ji Tianxing knew this array like the back of his hand. He didn't slow down at all. As his casting speed increased, the starlight disk spun faster and faster. Gradually, it became dazzling and colorful. The surging divine power gushed out like a tide and poured into the canyon through the cave. For a time, the canyon within a radius of a few hundred kilometers was filled with dense silver dots of light. It was a dreamy and blurry scene. The dozen or so groups of martial practitioners hiding in the canyon all discovered the anomaly. Everyone immediately became lively, and their curiosity was piqued. Many martial sages tried to release their divine senses into the cave to see what was going on. Waves of whispers and discussions also sounded in the crowd. Strange, why is there so much starlight gushing out from that cave? Such pure and mighty energy is definitely not something that a martial saint can control. Could this be divine energy? There's no martial god realm expert here. Only the god-level formation of the illusionary mystical ground is capable of unleashing the god force. Ji Tianxing seems to have broken the seal of the illusory, void, secret realm. Unbelievable. He is only a martial sage, but he is able to break the deity grade seal. I am very sure that he is the reincarnation of Kenshin. Otherwise, he would not be so powerful. It seems like he has not entered the illusionary void secret realm. There seems to be an array in the cave. I really want to enter the cave to see what is going on. However, Ji Tianxing is too cruel and merciless. He will kill us if he doesn't agree with us. Let alone entering the cave, we don't even dare to use our divine senses to check on him. If we anger him, we will definitely die. Many martial sages were hesitant and conflicted. Everyone wanted to see what was going on, but no one dared to take a step forward. Unknowingly, 10 hours had passed. Ji Tianxing continued to cast his skills and shot out tens of thousands of starlight sword radiances. He had successfully opened the ancient sky star array. Swoosh! The starlight disk stopped moving, and the starlight in the 365 grids gathered together, forming a silvery white light gate that was more than 10 feet tall. The mysterious silver light door stood quietly in the cave, and no one knew where it led to. Ji Tianxing looked a little tired, but he was very excited. His eyes were filled with anticipation. We will enter the illusionary void secret realm after we cross this teleportation formation. Yeah, let's go. After saying that, he stepped into the teleportation formation. Yin Yao followed closely behind. She stepped into the teleportation formation and disappeared with a swoosh. After the two of them left, the cave became silent. However, the white light doors still stood in the darkness and exuded a majestic and sacred aura. Half an hour later, more than 10 groups of martial artists hiding in a valley could not hold back their curiosity when they saw that there was no movement in the cave. A red-haired martial sage mustered up his courage and released his divine senses into the cave. Soon, he saw that there was no one in the cave except for a tall white light door. Ji Tianxing is gone. He must have entered the illusionary void secret realm. That teleportation formation is the real entrance. The red-haired martial sage was shocked and shouted in surprise. His companion was also overjoyed and said excitedly, "Then what are we waiting for? Let's go in. Even if Ji Tianxing is going to eat the meat, we can still drink the soup." The two of them immediately reached a consensus. They flew across the sky at lightning speed and entered the cave. When the other groups of martial artists saw that the two martial sages had entered the cave without fear of death, they could not hold back their curiosity. Many of them released their divine senses to check the situation in the cave. When they realized that Ji Tianxing had disappeared and that there was a teleportation formation in the cave, they instantly became excited. Ji Tianxing and his wife have already opened the illusionary void secret realm. They have already entered the secret realm. How can we be left behind? Ha! We have waited for so long. Finally, we see hope. Ji Tianxing will clear the obstacles in front, and we will follow behind to pick up the leftovers. This is perfect. More than 10 groups of martial artists were overjoyed and dashed into the cave without caring about their own safety. In less than 15 minutes, 18 groups of people, More than 100 powerhouses had rushed into the cave and entered the illusionary void secret realm. The valley, which had been filled with an oppressive atmosphere and danger, immediately became quiet. At this moment, two figures flew down from the mountain peak and landed at the entrance of the cave. They were two middle-aged men, and they were both top martial sages. The man on the left was wearing a purple robe. He had a handsome face and long white hair. There was a purple sword-shaped mark on his forehead. The man on the right was wearing a black robe and a large cloak that covered his entire face. His appearance could not be seen clearly. The two of them stood side by side and looked coldly at the entrance of the cave. The man in the purple robe on the left said, "Alliance Leader Wu, you guessed right. He has really broken the seal of the secret realm." The man in the black robe, who was called Alliance Leader Wu, said indifferently, "Commander Yi, both of us know his true identity. Isn't it normal for him to be able to accomplish such a miracle?" Commander Yi nodded slightly and said in a cold voice, "We have been observing from afar for 5 days and have been waiting patiently for an opportunity. In these 5 days, he has been breaking the divine array and has not rested at all. Now, his powers must be depleted." Chapter 23-24. In the illusory void secret realm. It was an alternate space with a radius of 90,000 miles. Just like the divine kingdoms of the three martial gods, it was not in the five elements world, but was closely connected to it. In the blue sky, there were white clouds and dazzling golden radiance. On the vast land, there were mountains, rivers, grasslands, and two mirror-like lakes. Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao stood high in the sky and looked down at the land below. The two of them were in the center of the illusory void secret realm. Under their feet was a 10,000-mile-long mountain range. It looked like a giant dragon lying on the ground. The strange thing was that the mountain range was not straight. Instead, it was twisted like a snake. To the east of the mountain range was an endless silver-white grassland. The ground was covered with star grass and silver rice flowers, which were rare herbs on the continent. On the silver-white grassland, there was a dark green lake, which formed a strong contrast with the grassland around it. To the west of the mountain range was a lush, primitive forest, which was dark green in color. In the middle of the forest, there was a crystal-clear lake, which looked like a mirror. Ji Tianxing looked down at the land. He looked at the mountain range, grassland, forest, and two lakes, which formed a strange scene. He immediately smiled. "Haha, it seems like martial god Nangong mainly cultivated artifact forging and array Dao. He couldn't break through to the martial god realm, so he switched to the Dao of Yin and Yang and tried to ascend to the upper realm." Yin Yao raised her eyebrows and asked curiously, "Why do you say that?" Ji Tianxing pointed at the mountain range and the land under his feet and explained, "Look at this land. Doesn't it look like a huge yin and yang diagram? The mountain range under our feet is the boundary of the yin and yang diagram. The silver-white grassland in the east is close to white, which represents yang. As for the dark green lake, it was yin within yang. As for the dark green forest in the west, it's close to black, which represents yin. The lake in the forest is one that is negative to yin and embraces yang." After listening to Ji Tianxing's explanation, Yin Yao was enlightened. She nodded and said, "It's really a huge yin and yang diagram. That Nangong martial god is really generous. He actually used the entire illusory void secret realm as a formation disk and set up a yin-yang layout." Ji Tianxing nodded and sighed with some regret. Although the idea was good, he failed in the end. In fact, there were 3,000 great Daos in the world that could be connected to the divine. The Tao of Yin and Yang was one of them. However, the reason Nangong martial god failed to ascend to the upper realm is not because of him. Yin Yao understood what he meant and didn't say much. She pointed at the mountain range below and said, "I just saw a few palaces and pagodas in the mountain range. It should be the residence of Nangong martial god. Let's go down and take a look. Let's explore the area before those martial sages arrive." "Okay," Ji Tianxing responded and flew towards the mountain range with Yun Yao. On the 10,000 miles long mountain range, there were a total of 9 mountains, each over 10,000 feet tall. There was a palace or a pagoda on top of each mountain. Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao landed on the southernmost mountain peak and stood outside a simple and majestic palace. This palace had 3 floors and was 3,000 feet tall. It was completely built with fiery red, earth core, spiritual jade. Probably no one had been here for thousands of years. The palace and the square in front of the palace were covered with a thick layer of dust. Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao crossed the square and walked to the front of the palace's gate. The vermilion gate was tightly shut. There were lifelike dragon and phoenix patterns carved on the gate, and it was sealed by a divine level formation. Fortunately, this was just an ordinary divine level formation. It wasn't too complicated. Ji Tianxing spent an hour to decipher it. They pushed open the heavy gate and stepped into the palace. The layout of the palace was very orderly. The main hall was in the middle, and there were side halls, guest rooms, and parlors on both sides. Behind the main hall was a study room, a side room, a secret room, and so on. Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao looked around the palace and realized that it was empty. There were no living people and no rare treasures. The slightly valuable things were the carvings on the walls and the lamps. They were all made of precious gemstones. Of course, the most valuable treasures were actually the few formation diagrams in the secret room. They were all divine level formations created by martial god Nangong himself. His experience and knowledge were recorded on them. Ji Tianxing glanced at them and realized that they were all virtual god-level formations. They were not worth mentioning. Moreover, 2 of the formations were not simple enough. There were some flaws and loopholes. He didn't care about these formation diagrams since they were worthless to him. However, he didn't want these divine-level formation diagrams to fall into the hands of others. He put them into his spatial ring and threw them in a corner. 15 minutes later, Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao walked out of the main hall. They flew into the sky and rushed to the second mountain peak that was thousands of miles away. The building on this mountain peak was not a palace. Instead, it was a 6,000 feet tall pagoda. The pagoda was dark gold in color. Even though it was covered in a layer of dust, it still shone brightly under the sun. The pagoda had 3 floors. The entrance was sealed with a divine level formation. Ji Tianxing spent an hour to break the seal. After entering the pagoda, his furrowed brows relaxed. This pagoda was a material warehouse. It stored countless rare materials for refining weapons. There were all kinds of rare metals, ores, and gemstones. There were also claws, teeth, and bones of ancient mutated beasts. It was a dazzling array. Most importantly, the pagoda had a divine level formation seal. It could greatly reduce the corrosion of time and delay the decay of the materials. More than 70% of the materials could still be used normally. Ji Tianxing didn't hold back. He swept through the first floor to the 3rd floor of the pagoda and took away all the usable materials. When he and Yun Yao left the pagoda, there were a few mountains of materials worth 1 billion in his spatial ring. Then, they rushed to the 3rd mountain peak. At the top of this mountain peak, there was a green-brown palace hidden by towering ancient trees. This palace seemed to be the place where Nangong martial god refined pills. Not only were there dozens of cauldrons and cauldrons, but there was also a large number of rare herbs. Ji Tianxing took away all the useful and expensive herbs. Then, he went to study the cauldrons and cauldrons. There were more than 30 cauldrons. They were all saint-level Dharma treasures. The highest quality one was a saint-level phoenix feather cauldron. Ji Tianxing was a little disappointed. He thought to himself that Nangong martial god was proficient in refining weapons and arrays. Alchemy was definitely his weak point. So, he only took the phoenix feather cauldron and gave it to Yun Yao. Even if he didn't use it to refine pills, it would be good for self-defense. When they arrived at the 4th mountain peak, someone had already reached it. 3 older martial sages were gathered at the entrance of the ancient palace. A white-haired old man with a bow and arrow stood guard outside the gate, keeping a lookout. The other 2 burly old men in purple robes were studying the sealing array with full concentration. They looked like they were racking their brains. Chapter 23-25. The three martial sages rushed into the cave with dozens of other martial artists and arrived at the illusory void secret land. As the saying goes, the older you are, the wiser you are. The three of them had lived for thousands of years and had seen many things. They had explored many secret lands and relics, and had rich experience in exploring. Therefore, after they entered the illusory void secret land, they did not stop at the border, but went straight to the mountain range in the middle. They knew that if there were any treasures or buildings in the secret land, they would be in the middle. As it turned out, the three of them were right. When they landed in the mountain range, they found a palace. The simple and solemn palace exuded a majestic aura. It was obvious that there were treasures hidden there. However, after a long time, the three of them still could not open the seal of the palace. They had just found a clue when Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao came again. The three of them could only take out their weapons and stare at Ji Tianxing and his wife warily. Ji Tianxing walked to the gate of the palace and stood on the steps. He looked at the three martial sages and said expressionlessly, "The palace is sealed by a divine level array. It is not something you can break. Don't waste your time." The three martial sages looked at each other and were unwilling to accept this. The white-haired old man said sternly, "Ji Tianxing, when we were in the EC, we heard about your name and deeds. We know that you are powerful. However, we are not cowards. We have also survived many trials and tribulations. No matter how powerful you are, you have to follow the rules of the underworld. We found this palace first. If you try to snatch it, you will be cutting off our wealth. Don't blame us for fighting with our lives." The other two old men in purple robes nodded in agreement. "That's right. First come, first served. Ji Tianxing, instead of wasting your time with us, why don't you go to the other palaces? You might be able to find more treasures." Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and sneered, The rules of the underworld? I am the one who broke the seal of the illusory void secret land. According to you, the entire illusory void secret land belongs to me. Not only did you barge in without permission, but you also want to take away my wealth. Don't you deserve to die?" The three saints of the Eastern Sea stiffened, and their expressions turned ugly. You are twisting words and forcing logic." The white-haired old man, who was the leader, was holding a dark silver bow. He glared at Ji Tianxing with a fierce look and shouted angrily, "Ji Tianxing, I don't want to argue with you. In short, this palace belongs to us, the three sages of the Eastern Sea. Even if we have to fight with our lives on the line and die here, we will never back down." The sneer on Ji Tianxing's face deepened. "Is that so? I want to see just how powerful the three saints of the Eastern Sea are." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly raised his palms and shot out a dazzling golden light. Shwa! The golden light condensed into three dragon claws the size of mountains. With the power to destroy the heavens and earth, they slammed down from the sky towards the three Eastern Sea saints. At this critical moment, the three saints of the Eastern Sea did not hesitate to counterattack. 7-star alignment. The white-haired old man roared. He held the bow in his left hand and plucked the bowstring with his right hand. Instantly, 7 silver light bullets were shot out. Shwa shwa. The 7 silver lights were linked together like shooting stars, piercing through the sky and illuminating hundreds of miles around. The 2 purple-robed old men also brandished their swords and sabers, slashing at the golden dragon claw in the sky with overwhelming saber light and sword shadows. In the next moment, the swords and the 7-star alignment hit the 3 dragon claws. Boom, boom, boom. In the deafening sound, the 7-star alignment and the swords were smashed into pieces. The huge golden dragon claws hit the 3 saints of the Eastern Sea and smashed into the square in front of the palace. Dong, dong, dong. 3 earth-shattering sounds burst out at the same time, shaking the sky. The huge square in front of the palace was smashed into a huge pit, and debris and dust flew everywhere. The 3 saints of the Eastern Sea were lying at the bottom of the pit. Half of their bodies were buried by dirt and rocks, and they looked very pathetic. The white-haired old man's chest caved in, and there were traces of blood on his chest. The two old men in purple robes were covered in blood, and blood kept flowing out of their noses and mouths. Dozens of bones in their bodies had been smashed into pieces. The two sides had only exchanged one blow, and Ji Tianxing was able to defeat the three saints of the Eastern Sea and injure them. The three of them were filled with fear. They ignored their injuries and hurriedly got up from the pit and ran away without looking back. Shwa shwa shwa. The strong desire to live drove the three of them to unleash their strongest power and cut across the sky like shooting stars. After 10 breaths, the three of them had flown a few hundred miles and disappeared into the forest to the west of the mountain range. Ji Tianxing didn't chase after them. He stood in the square in front of the palace and watched the three saints of the Eastern Sea escape with a playful smile on his face. So that's all you have. I overestimated you. Just a moment ago, the white-haired old man had vowed that he wouldn't give up on this palace even if he had to fight to the death. In the blink of an eye, he forgot about those words and ran away without hesitation. How ironic. Yin Yao also smiled and said calmly, "They've lived for a long time. The older they get, the more cautious they are and the more afraid they are of death. Dignity and integrity are not important in the face of death." Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and walked over the pit and ruins to the front of the palace. He used the divine eye secret technique and quickly saw through the defensive array of the palace. An hour later, he broke the seal and opened the door of the palace. He brought Yun Yao into the palace, walked around the palace, and looted a few 100 million worth of spirit stones, elixirs, and materials. Although many of the elixirs were made 4,000 years ago, Nangong and the divine eye secret technique were still intact. But Nangong martial god had preserved it well, and the palace was sealed by a divine formation. Those elixirs were well preserved, and their efficacy hadn't decreased much. Then, Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao went to the 5th and 6th mountains and looted the treasures in the palaces and pagodas. 2 hours later, the two of them went to the 7th mountain. During the flight, Ji Tianxing frowned as if he was deep in thought. Yun Yao asked with telepathy, "Tianxing, what are you thinking about?" Ji Tianxing replied with telepathy, "There are 9 mountains in this mountain range. There are 9 palaces or pagodas, all of which store a large amount of cultivation resources. However, we've already looted 6 mountains and got more than 2 billion worth of cultivation resources, but we haven't even seen the shadow of a divine weapon. If you were martial god Nangong, where would you hide the divine weapon?" Yin Yao thought for a while and said, "The 5th mountain is in the middle of the 9 mountains. It's also the core of the yin-yang layout. Just now, we also saw that the palace on the mountain peak was indeed dazzling and magnificent, even more magnificent. Normally, martial god Nangong would hide the divine weapon in that palace." Chapter 23-26. At this point, Yun Yao paused for a moment. She suddenly thought of something and frowned. Could it be that there's no divine artifact here? Or is this secret realm not Nangong martial god's cave abode? After all, the whole thing is a conspiracy of the Tianju divine nation. The Taihao divine nation spread the news that this is Nangong martial god's cave abode. It's very likely that the Tianju divine nation manipulated it. Ji Tianxing smiled and said with certainty, "Yao Yao, your speculation is very reasonable. However, I'm sure that this secret realm is Nangong martial god's cave abode. The secret realm's sealing divine array, the heavenly cycle star array at the entrance, the secret realm's yin-yang layout, and the sealing arrays of the palaces are all divine arrays from 4,000 years ago. They can't be faked. Even Tianju martial god would find it difficult to set them up." Yin Yao nodded in agreement and asked, "Since this is Nangong martial god's cave abode, where is the divine artifact that he made when he was alive?" Ji Tianxing looked at the silver grassland to the east of the mountain range and then at the endless forest to the west. A smile flashed in his eyes. "If I'm not wrong, the divine artifact's hiding place should be related to the yin-yang layout." Yin Yao immediately understood what he meant. Her eyes lit up. "Then what are we waiting for? Let's go and check it out." Ji Tianxing waved his hand and chuckled. "There's no hurry. A large number of martial saints have entered the secret realm. The situation is a bit chaotic. It won't be too late to look for the divine artifact after I've messed up the situation and dealt with those martial saints." As he spoke, he and Yun Yao landed on the seventh mountain peak and landed outside of Vermilion Palace. There were 3 groups of martial artists confronting each other in the square in front of the palace. There were 4 or 5 people in each group, and half of them were martial saints. The 3 groups coveted the treasures in the palace, but none of them could get close to the palace gate. Everyone was holding swords and sabers. Violent battle intent was accumulating in their bodies. They were ready to fight. The atmosphere was a bit tense. The slightest movement would trigger a chaotic battle. Behind and to the side of the palace, there were 2 groups of warriors hiding in the forest. They all retracted their auras and cautiously approached the palace to study the palace's defensive array. There were a total of 5 groups of people, more than 30 martial artists, and they all had designs on this palace. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing revealed a playful smile. "Looks like the competition is fierce," Yun Yao said with a smile. "Fortunately, we were the first to come in. Previously, we made an example of these people, so they didn't dare to come close. Otherwise, we would have to fight a fierce battle every time we plunder a palace." Ji Tianxing nodded and said with a playful smile, "Since these 5 groups of people are in a deadlock, I will give them a chance." "What opportunity?" Yun Yao asked subconsciously. Ji Tianxing smiled, but did not answer. He took her to the back of the palace. The 2 of them landed in a forest. 3,000 feet away was another group of cultivators. That group of cultivators had 8 people. The 2 leaders were martial saints, and the other 6 were martial lords. Seeing Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao suddenly appear, that group of cultivators hurriedly retreated as if they were facing a great enemy. Ji Tianxing did not bother to pay attention to them. He focused on observing the defensive array and then began to cast spells to break the array. He had already broken the array of the 6 palaces and the pagoda. He was very familiar with Nangong martial god's method of setting up arrays. In merely 45 minutes, he had cracked the grand array. Whoosh! Suddenly, a wide gap appeared in the 5-colored light barrier that enveloped the palace walls, like a gate that was more than 20 feet tall. Ji Tianxing led Yun Yao through the gap and entered the palace. The 2 of them split up and moved as fast as lightning in the palace, plundering the treasures as quickly as possible. In just 30 minutes, the couple had plundered 300 million worth of resources from the palace's secret rooms and treasure vaults. There was still about 200 million worth of cultivation resources left in the palace. They were all common items. They had purposely left them behind. Then, the 2 of them turned invisible and left the palace. Then a good show began. The 5 groups of cultivators outside the palace saw that the seal array had been opened. They hurriedly passed through the gap and swarmed into the palace. It was their first time entering the palace. Their minds were filled with treasures and divine artifacts. They were almost dizzy from excitement. However, they were not familiar with the layout of the palace. They ran around like headless flies and wasted a lot of time. When they found the secret rooms and treasures, they found that the others had also rushed over. As a result, the 2 groups of people inevitably came to blows in order to compete for cultivation resources. At first, the 2 groups of cultivators fought fiercely in the side palace. Not long after, the other 2 groups of cultivators met in the underground palace. They fought to the death for a few divine artifacts. The last group of cultivators was luckier. While the others were fighting, they plundered most of the treasures in the underground palace. However, when they sneaked out of the palace with the treasures, they were stopped by the other 2 groups of cultivators. Those 2 groups of cultivators were, of course, the victors of the battle. Although they all suffered different degrees of injuries, they were murderous and full of fighting spirit. The moment the 2 sides met, they started fighting without saying a word. The 2 groups of cultivators besieged the cultivators with the treasures. They fought until the sky fell and the earth cracked. After a quarter of an hour, the entire palace turned into ruins. Dust filled the sky. The result was without a doubt. The cultivators with the treasures were killed in a mess. More than half of the treasures were also snatched away. After this group of people was defeated miserably, only a few survivors escaped. The other two groups of cultivators moved the battlefield. In order to fight for the divine artifacts and treasures, they fought fiercely again. During this process, there were a few groups of cultivators who heard the fighting and rushed over to see what was going on. After they learned the truth, they also joined in the battle. They fought desperately for the divine artifacts and resources. Just like this, a chaotic battle that kept spreading began. Dozens of martial artists fought fiercely for a few sane artifacts and 200 million cultivation resources. And the instigator, Ji Tianxing, had long rushed to the 8th mountain peak with Yun Yao. On this mountain peak, there was a gilded pagoda. It was also sealed by a divine array. When Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao arrived, there were a total of 6 groups of cultivators surrounding the pagoda. They were confronting each other with hostility. Everyone wanted to be the first to enter the pagoda and plunder all the treasures and resources. However, no one could break the divine array. Everyone was in a stalemate. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing used the same trick again. He broke the defensive array of the pagoda. Then, he and Yun Yao entered the pagoda first and plundered the pagoda as fast as they could. The two of them plundered more than half of the resources in the pagoda. They only left about 30% of the resources for the 6 groups of cultivators outside the pagoda to fight for. This matched the cultivators' initial thoughts. Chapter 23-27. Half an hour later, Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao left the pagoda. The 6 groups of warriors had already rushed into the pagoda like wolves and tigers. After a while, they started a chaotic battle in the pagoda. In order to fight for some sacred Grey Dharma treasures and cultivation resources, they did not hesitate to risk their lives. The battle lasted for 15 minutes, and the entire pagoda was destroyed and turned into ruins. The 6 groups of warriors suffered heavy casualties, but they did not get many benefits. Following that, the martial artists who carried the treasures were hunted down and surrounded by other martial artists. A fierce chase and chaotic battle unfolded in the mountain range. At this time, Ji Tianxing rushed to the 9th mountain peak and created another chaotic battle. In this chaos, he and Yun Yao plundered resources worth hundreds of millions, leaving only a few sacred Grey Dharma treasures and a bunch of sacred Grey Dharma treasures. For groups of warriors were drawn into the vortex of fighting, and the chaotic battle began. Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao left quietly and flew to the silver plains east of the mountain range. During the flight, Yun Yao looked back a few times. She sighed with emotion when she saw the lights flashing above the mountain range and the loud noises shaking the sky. Those people are so pitiful. They're fighting for the leftovers, but they don't know that the biggest benefits have been taken by us. Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and said calmly, "So what? If I didn't break those divine arrays, they wouldn't even be able to enter the illusory sky's secret realm, let alone get any benefits. The people of the heaven and divine nation are eyeing us covetously. They must be plotting revenge. More than a dozen groups of warriors entered the secret realm. They are really a hindrance, so I can only get rid of them first." Yun Yao nodded and looked at the silver plains below. She asked, "Tianxing, do you think there are divine Grey Dharma treasures in this grassland full of stargrass and silver rice flowers?" Ji Tianxing thought for a while and said seriously, "This idea seems absurd, but it has an unexpected effect. However, this is just my guess, and I can't be sure. After we investigate it, we will know the answer." Subsequently, both of them released their divine senses and began to investigate the situation on the grassland. The formless divine sense enveloped a radius of 1,000 miles and penetrated deep into the ground, not letting go of a single spot. Even the rocks and ants deep underground could not escape the senses of the two of them. Time passed quietly. Unknowingly, for hours had passed. Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao explored a radius of 10,000 miles, but found nothing. Not only was there no aura of a divine artifact, there wasn't even the slightest clue about it. However, the two of them discovered something interesting. The 3 sages of the Eastern Sea who had been injured by Ji Tianxing, were actually plucking stargrass and silver rice flowers on this grassland. Those two kinds of flowers and plants were both medicinal herbs used in alchemy. One stalk could be exchanged for several spirit stones. Although the price wasn't high, there were so many of them. If he could pick a few million flowers and plants, he could sell them for tens of millions of spirit stones. Ji Tianxing was very puzzled. The three sages of the Eastern Sea were respectable people. Why would they be interested in these lowly plants? After taking a closer look, he finally understood what was going on. It turned out that the three sages of the Eastern Sea's injuries were even more miserable, and their strength was also quite weak. Judging from their sorry state, it was obvious that they had gone through several fierce battles. Ji Tianxing immediately guessed that the three sages of the Eastern Sea must have also participated in the chaotic battle to try to snatch resources and treasures. However, the three old men suffered losses in the chaotic battle and did not reap any benefits. In desperation, they could only pick medicinal herbs on the grassland. At least there was some compensation. They couldn't return empty-handed with serious injuries, right? When the three sages of the Eastern Sea discovered Ji Tianxing, they were obviously shocked and hurriedly turned to flee. Ji Tianxing laughed when he saw this. He was too lazy to chase after them. Not long after, he and Yun Yao flew near the lake and stopped in midair to rest. The lake under their feet had a radius of a few thousand miles. The lake water was dark green. Layers of ripples appeared on the surface of the lake when the breeze blew. Looking down from the sky, the entire lake was like a huge dark green gem embedded in the silver ground. Ji Tianxing stared at the dark green lake. After a moment of careful observation, he suddenly frowned. No, there's something wrong with this lake. Yin Yao turned to look at him and asked, "What's wrong?" Ji Tianxing frowned and said, "Logically speaking, a normal lake should be clear and bright like a mirror. However, this lake is dark green. There must be something wrong with the water quality, or the bottom of the lake has been tampered with. However, I've checked the water quality. It's normal and even contains rich spiritual energy. The bottom of the lake is also normal. There's nothing wrong with it. However, the more normal it is, the more abnormal it is." Yin Yao suddenly understood. She said with a burning gaze, "You mean, trying to cover it up will only make it more conspicuous?" "That's right." Ji Tianxing nodded and said with a smile, "I'm sure that Marshal Godnan Gong has spent a lot of effort on this lake. Then let's dive to the bottom of the lake and take a look." Yin Yao looked expectant. However, at this moment, two dazzling lights suddenly flew in the sky behind them. Swoosh! Swoosh! In the blink of an eye, the two dazzling lights pierced through the sky and arrived in front of them. After the dazzling lights faded, two tall figures were revealed. The middle-aged man on the left was wearing a purple robe. He had long white hair and a purple sword mark on his forehead. The man on the right was wearing a black robe and a cloak that covered his face. "Hee, Ji Tianxing, we meet again." The man in the purple robe sneered, and his eyes were filled with cold, killing intent. Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao turned around and raised their eyebrows when they saw the man in the purple robe. "Yi Lu Shui, you're really here?" The corner of Ji Tianxing's mouth curled into a sneer, and his eyes turned cold. When he first met Yuan Zhen and the martial sages of the Heaven End Holy Nation, he knew that Yi Lu Shui would not stay out of this. He must have been involved in this conspiracy. Now that Yi Lu Shui had appeared, his guess was confirmed. He then looked at the man in the black robe beside Yi Lu Shui. After sensing his aura, he sneered, "Wu Duantian, since you're here, why are you still hiding?" The man in the black robe jerked and took off his cloak, revealing his face. It was Wu Duantian. He looked at Ji Tianxing and mocked himself. As expected of the Kenshin, these disguises are useless in front of you. They're just a joke. Ji Tianxing glanced at Wu Duantian and Yi Lu Shui and said, "You want to kill me with just the two of you? You're too naive. The rest of you don't have to hide anymore. Come out." Yi Lu Shui's face changed, and he frowned. However, after hesitating for a while, he waved his hand. Then a few surges of spiritual force came out from the silver grassland in all directions. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. A total of 6 martial sages emerged from the ground and flew up to the sky to hover in the air. There were men and women among the 6 martial sages, and they had different figures and appearances. There were even 2 martial sages who were dressed strangely. Chapter 23-28. There were 8 martial sages. The leaders, Yi Lu Shui and Wu Duantian, were both peak martial sages. Especially Wu Duantian, who was known as the strongest person who was closest to the martial god realm. The other 6 martial sages were all more than 1,000 years old, and their strength was above the 5th degree realm. Only heaven and God Nation's foundation and power could gather so many elite martial sages at once. Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao's situation immediately became dangerous. Yi Lu Shui looked proud and sneered at Ji Tianxing. "How is it? Is it enough to kill you now?" Ji Tianxing slowly took out the sword of burial of heaven and sneered. "Ha! It's just enough for me to use all my strength." Yi Lu Shui sneered and waved his hand, shooting a dazzling light into the sky. After a while, a few flowing lights came from afar. Swoosh! Swoosh! The streams of light converged as they neared, revealing 6 figures. The leader was Yuan Zhen, followed by Marshal Saint Qingshan, Jiang Qi, Tobada, Helian Wuzhua, and Tantai Xian. After the 6 martial sages arrived, they immediately joined the encirclement and looked at Ji Tianxing with murderous intent. Especially Yuan Zhen, whose eyes were full of resentment, and his body was emitting a bone-piercing chill. Although Yuan Zhen, Marshal Saint Qingshan, and the rest were seriously injured, they had taken good care of themselves. However, after a few days of careful recuperation, they were all fine now and had recovered about 70 to 80% of their strength. A total of 14 martial sages surrounded Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao. The 2 of them were suddenly in a precarious situation. Yi Lu Shui looked at Ji Tianxing and sneered. "Now it's enough to kill you." Ji Tianxing said expressionlessly, "It's not certain who will kill who. You won't give up until you see the coffin." Yi Lu Shui shouted and waved his hand, ordering, "Kill." Suddenly, more than 10 martial sages waved their swords and sabers, and the sky was covered with saber light and sword shadows, as well as the brilliance of spells, and they poured down on Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao. The dazzling 5-colored light illuminated the heaven and earth, enveloping an area with a radius of several hundred miles. Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao did not panic in the face of danger. They waved their swords and used their unique sword techniques to counterattack. Sun-shattering sword, heaven-seizing palm. Ji Tianxing swung his sword and unleashed hundreds of starry sword beams, while his left palm struck out a mountain-sized golden dragon claw. Starfall. Yun Yao swung her silver moon dual swords with all her might, creating hundreds of streaks of starlight that fell like meteors. Saber light and sword shadows collided in the sky, creating a deafening sound. Boom, boom, boom. The light and shadows of the spells that filled the sky shattered, and billions of light fragments burst out, erupting with a destructive shockwave. The silver-white grassland was engulfed by the shockwave, and the ground began to crack. The starry flowers and plants were all crushed into fine powder, mixing with the soil and splashing everywhere. Such a huge commotion immediately alerted the 3 saints of the Eastern Sea who were thousands of miles away. The 3 of them quickly stopped harvesting the herbs and flew across the sky at lightning speed, heading toward the dark green lake. When the 3 of them arrived near the battlefield and saw the situation clearly, their expressions became very interesting. More than 10 martial sacred realm cultivators surrounded Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao in a frenzy, causing the sky to crumble and the earth to crack and the sun and moon to dim. The 3 saints of the Eastern Sea were excited. Not only were they gloating, but they were also commenting. However, the 3 of them were severely injured and did not dare to get too close to the battlefield. They could only watch the battle from 200 miles away. Soon, 100 breaths time passed. Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao could not withstand the attacks of 14 martial sages, and they were forced to retreat. Both of them were injured. Their white robes and dresses were stained with blood, and their faces were as pale as paper. Ji Tianqing's injuries were more serious. There were wounds on his chest and back that were so deep that his bones could be seen. Blood kept oozing out of them. After all, he was the main target of the martial sages. Yi Lu Shui and Wu Duantian did not let him go and swore that they would not stop until they killed him. This battle was the most difficult battle in Ji Tianqing's life. Even when he was attacked by martial god Tianju's avatar, it was not as dangerous. Sky Dragon Overlord Body. At this critical moment, Ji Tianqing did not hold back anymore, and he could only use his trump card. He let out a low roar, and golden light surged out of his body. His body expanded to a height of 30 meters, and he turned into a giant shining with golden light. His combat strength increased by 5 times, and he reached the limit of the martial sage realm. The few martial sages joined forces and slashed out dozens of saber radiance and sword shadows, releasing dazzling light that covered the sky. Go to hell! Ji Tianqing roared with murderous intent. He held the 80 feet long burial of heaven sword with both hands and slashed out a 1,000 feet long giant sword. Sky Dragon Slash. He ignored the attacks of the martial sages and slashed the giant golden sword into the crowd. Bang, bang, bang. Dozens of saber radiance and sword shadows slashed on his body, and there was a series of muffled sounds. Golden light flashed all over his body, and he was pushed back a few steps. However, he was not injured. However, the 1,000-foot-long giant sword struck a martial sane on the spot, splitting him in half. At the same time, Wu Duantian and Yi Lu Shui joined forces and slashed out a fist radiance and a 1,000-feet-long giant sword. Ji Tianqing did not dodge, and he slashed out with the burial of heaven sword. Deity Slaying Sword. The 1,000-feet-long giant golden sword hit the fist radiance and sword radiance. Kaboom! There was a thunderous sound, and the sword radiance and fist radiance collapsed on the spot and shattered into pieces. Yi Lu Shui and Wu Duantian's attacks were neutralized, and they used more powerful techniques. Yuan Zhen and Jiang Qi took the opportunity to attack Ji Tianqing from the side. Shoo! 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 Hundreds of golden light blades shot out like a rain of arrows and hit Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing was hit so hard that his body trembled. Golden light flashed all over his body, and blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. He turned to look at Yuan Zhen and the others. Flames of anger burned in his eyes, and he let out a roar. "Little bastard, you're courting death." As he spoke, he formed a seal with his right hand and pointed the burial of heaven's sword at the sky. Sword rain. Thousands of silver light spots lit up in the sky and fell down like a meteor shower. In the blink of an eye, more than 8,000 starry swords fell on the ground. Boom, boom, boom. Everything within a radius of 500 miles was drowned by the starry light and became chaotic. The already messy ground was blasted into a huge pit by the thousands of giant swords. It was at least 500 miles wide. The dust that covered the sky and the sun did not dissipate for a long time. Yi Lu Shui and Wu Duantian were the most powerful. They relied on the power of their protective Dharma treasures and were able to resist the sword rain. The other martial sages were in trouble. They were all hit by the starry swords and screamed in agony. Some were seriously injured and blood spurted out of their 7 orifices. Some had their limbs chopped off and were lying in the ruins with blood all over their bodies. Jiangqi and Tuobada were the most miserable. They were cut in half by the giant swords, and their bodies were destroyed. Their spiritual souls were also seriously injured. They fled the battlefield in a panic and flew far away. Ji Tianqing's sword rain had turned the situation around and destroyed the morale of Yi Lu Shui and the others. However, the battle was not over yet. Chapter 23-29. Bam! 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 Deafening explosions continued to erupt in the sky. Yi Lu Shui and Wu Duantian led many martial sages to attack Ji Tianqing and Yunyao. The two of them were forced to retreat, and their injuries were getting worse. Their bodies were covered with wounds from swords and sabers. Dark red blood continued to gush out, soaking their white robes, almost turning them into dark red blood men. Of course, while the two of them were injured, the other martial sages were also badly injured. Jiangqi and Tuoba were the first to have their physical bodies destroyed. Only their divine souls escaped from the battlefield. A quarter of an hour later, another two martial sages had their physical bodies destroyed, and their divine souls fled in a sorry state. The number of people on Yi Liushui's side was decreasing, but Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao's injuries were getting worse. Judging from the current situation, the two of them would eventually be killed by the exhaustion of their powers. The final winner would be Yi Liushui's side. Although they would have to pay a heavy price, at least half of the martial sages would have their physical bodies destroyed. However, Yi Liushui was already mentally prepared. As long as he could kill Ji Tianxing, he would pay any price. Bam! In the deafening noise, Yun Yao, who was covered in blood, was pushed back by the four martial sages. She rolled and flew backward, crashing into the dark green lake dozens of miles away. His body drew an arc in the air, and along the way, blood splattered all over the sky. Plop! Yun Yao crashed into the dark green lake, creating a huge splash. When she fell into the lake, she was jolted awake by the cold lake water. At the same time, she sensed that the lake water was a little strange. Not only did it contain rich spiritual qi, but there was also a faint trace of divine power. Something's not right. Tianxing and I have checked the lake before. There was nothing unusual about it. Why is there divine power? She was very sensitive to all kinds of elemental powers. It was definitely not an illusion. Therefore, she looked around with bright eyes, trying to find a reason. Soon, she realized that the water in the dark green lake was so clear that she could see the bottom. She could also vaguely see that there were a few huge gullies at the bottom of the lake. He didn't need to guess to know that it was the aftermath of the battle that had caused the lake bottom to crack open. Strands of faint golden threads spread out from the ravines and floated in the lake water. Soon it dissipated. Yin Yao's eyes flashed with shock. I didn't guess wrong. There really is divine power. After the initial shock, a strong sense of surprise surged into her mind. She recalled what Ji Tianxing had said before. There was something mysterious about this lake. Nangong martial god might have hidden the divine weapon in the lake. Thinking of this, she completely disregarded her own injuries and quickly dived down to the bottom of the lake. However, the four martial saints did not give up. They brandished their weapons and chased after him. Shua! 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 The four of them dived into the lake and attacked Yun Yao from all directions. They unleashed dazzling sword and saber lights and attacked Yun Yao from all directions. Yun Yao immediately frowned and shouted with a cold expression, 3,000 weak waters. She put away her silver moon swords and formed a mysterious seal with both hands. She waved her hands quickly in front of her. In an instant, an ice blue seal made of hundreds of lines with a radius of 100 feet appeared in front of her. As she clasped her hands together, the mysterious ice blue seal exploded. Boom! Instantly, the lake water within a radius of 150 miles disappeared. It condensed into a dozen huge ice blue dragons that were thousands of feet long and charged toward the four martial saints. Bang! 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 The huge ice blue dragons shattered all the saber lights and sword shadows in the sky. The four martial saints were also hit by the ice dragons. They spat out blood and were sent flying. No one could stop Yin Yao anymore. She sped up and dived into the wide gully at the bottom of the lake. On the surface, the bottom of the lake looked like dark mud and sand. However, when she entered the gully, she realized that there was a layer of brown rocks below. There were many gullies in the hard and thick rock layer, and dark golden light kept flowing out. Yin Yao could clearly sense that the dark golden light was releasing a strong divine power. She was even more excited. She quickly crossed the gully and dived into the brown rock layer. The next moment, when she entered the rock layer, she was stunned. She saw that there was a space with a radius of hundreds of miles in the rock layer. It looked like a huge cave. The ground and walls of the cave were inlaid with many precious stones. There were red, dark golden, green, and black gems. Each of them was as big as a wash basin. There were at least tens of thousands of precious stones. They were arranged in a special pattern, forming a huge array. And in the middle of this array, there was a stone tomb that was thousands of feet tall and thousands of feet wide. The stone tomb was made of dark rocks. There were mysterious array patterns carved on the surface of the tomb. They were constantly emitting golden light. After a while, Yin Yao came to her senses. She was pleasantly surprised. She rushed toward the stone tomb as fast as lightning. Tianqing was right. There is something else at the bottom of the lake. There might be a divine artifact hidden in that stone tomb. This thought appeared in her mind. She was so excited that she almost forgot about her pain. In the blink of an eye, she rushed to the front of the stone tomb. When she looked carefully, she realized that the huge stone tomb was also covered in cracks. The golden divine light was coming from the cracks. She raised her palms without hesitation. She made a hand seal and sent starlight into the stone tomb. Suddenly, the array patterns on the stone tomb were activated. They lit up with 5-colored divine light. Swoosh! The entire stone tomb became multicolored and dazzling, like a mountain-sized gem, bursting with a terrifying aura of divine power. Yin Yao stared at the 5-colored light. She carefully observed the array in the stone tomb, looking for a way to break it. But just as she was thinking, she heard the sound of something breaking through the air behind her. There were also a few angry shouts filled with killing intent. "Bitch, it's time for you to die. Let's see where you can run to now. I'll kill you first. Then, I'll deal with Ji Tianqing. I'll let you two die together." Yin Yao looked back. It was the 4 martial sages who were chasing after her. At this critical moment, she did not have time to defend herself. She could only teleport to avoid them. Swoosh! With a flash of silver light, she teleported 40 miles away and appeared in the 5-colored gem array. The 4 martial saints' magical attacks missed their target and landed on the stone tomb, causing the 5-colored light screen to tremble continuously. However, the 5-color light screen was not damaged at all. Instead, it emitted a terrifying rebound force. Dozens of saber lights and sword shadows instantly shot toward the 4 martial sages at an even faster speed and with even greater power. The 4 martial sages were caught off guard. They could not dodge in time and were hit on the spot. Bam! 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 A series of muffled sounds rang out. The 4 martial sages were sent flying and smashed into the gem array. 2 of the martial sages had their limbs chopped off. The other one had his legs chopped off. Chapter 23:30. The 4 martial sages chased after Yin Yao, but were severely injured by their own techniques. The most unlucky martial sage's body was destroyed. This was simply too hilarious. Not only were the 4 martial sages stunned, but even Yin Yao was shocked and incredulous. She stared at the stone tomb and could not help but exclaim, "Oh my God!" As expected of a deity-level array, it has such terrifying power. Looks like we can only try to break this array and not force it out. Just as she was lamenting, the martial sage whose body was destroyed quickly retreated with his spiritual soul. The 3 martial sages who were severely injured also turned around and ran away in a panic. Swoosh! 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 The 3 of them ran even faster than when they came. In the blink of an eye, they had rushed out of the gemstone array. Yin Yao hesitated for a moment but did not chase after them. Instead, she focused on observing the stone tomb and figuring out how to break the array. She could roughly see that the deity-level array that enveloped the stone tomb was not too profound or mysterious. At least, it was easier than the deity-level array that Ji Tianqing had broken before. Moreover, the power of the deity-level array seemed to be weaker. Could it be that the deity-level array that was hidden at the bottom of the lake has gradually weakened after more than 4,000 years? She secretly speculated, and her heart was filled with hope and anticipation. At the same time, the 3 severely injured martial sages ran back to the grassland and screamed at the top of their lungs. "Something is wrong with this lake. Lord Yi, There are treasures at the bottom of the lake. Everyone, come take a look. There is a deity-level array at the bottom of the lake, and that bitch is trying to break it. Originally, Yi Lu Shui, Wu Duantian, and the others were besieging Ji Tianxing. The two sides were fighting fiercely, and it was difficult to tell who had the upper hand. Ji Tianxing was forced to retreat, and his injuries were worsening. He was about to lose. Yi Lu Shui, Wu Duantian, Yuan Zhen, and the others wanted to kill him in one go. However, the sudden roar that resounded in the sky caused everyone to be stunned. Even Yi Lu Shui and Wu Duantian could not help but turn to look at the three martial sages. The same thought appeared in the minds of the martial sages at the same time. There are treasures at the bottom of the lake? Could it be martial god Nangong's inheritance and divine weapon? In an instant, everyone's minds were filled with this sudden surprise, and their emotions became excited and excited. Divine weapon. Nangong martial god's divine Dao inheritance. As long as he could obtain just one of them, he would be able to dominate the entire Xinwu continent and surpass all the other martial saints. He might even have a chance to reach the martial god realm. Not only were the ordinary martial sages excited, even Wu Duantian and Yi Lu Shui were filled with longing and reverie. After all, Yi Lu Shui was willing to be martial god Tianju's lackey, working hard without complaint, just to break through to the martial god realm. As the expert closest to the god realm, Wu Duantian knew that breaking through to the god realm was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Now that such a great opportunity was right in front of them, how could they not be moved? Who should kill Ji Tianxing first, or go to the bottom of the lake to snatch the treasures and divine weapons? Yi Lu Shui was very wise and made a decision in the blink of an eye. Kill Ji Tianxing first. Then, he would go to the bottom of the lake and rob Nangong martial god's treasures. Everyone, don't panic, and don't forget our mission. Let's kill Ji Tianxing first. Seeing that everyone was hesitating, Yi Lu Shui quickly shouted and gave the order in a dignified tone. Many martial sages were stunned for a moment before they suppressed their restless thoughts and continued to besiege Ji Tianxing. However, Ji Tianxing had already escaped from the encirclement while everyone was still in a daze. Swoosh! In a flash, he teleported 100 miles and flew to the sky above the dark green lake. In the next moment, he dived into the lake without hesitation. Swoosh! He turned into a ray of golden light and sped through the dark green lake. Soon, he reached the bottom of the lake. Relying on the connection between him and Yun Yao's divine soul, he instantly found the trench at the bottom of the lake and dived into the rock layer. In just 2 short breaths, he entered the gemstone formation and flew to Yun Yao's side. Yun Yao was observing the colorful light shield protecting the stone tomb when she suddenly sensed Ji Tianxing's aura and turned to look at him. Tianxing, you guessed right. There might be a divine artifact hidden in this stone tomb. I've already checked it. The defensive divine array of this stone tomb is not very powerful, and it is based on the limitless yin and yang Dao. She told Ji Tianxing the result of her observation through divine sense. Ji Tianxing nodded and stared at the stone tomb. He said to her, through divine sense, Yao Yao, go and block the entrance. Find a way to stop Yi Lu Shui and the others. I only need 100 breaths to break this array. 100 breaths? Yun Yao frowned and felt an unparalleled pressure. With her strength and condition, it was impossible for her to stop more than a dozen martial sages and hold on for 100 breaths. However, without hesitation, she nodded and said, Okay, I'll stop them. After saying that, she held the silver moon dual swords and dashed toward the entrance of the cave. Fortunately, the entrance of this huge cave with a radius of a few hundred miles was only a crack. It was about 100 feet long and a few hundred feet wide. There were hard brown rocks on both sides. When Yun Yao arrived at the entrance, Yi Lu Shui and Wu Duantian also rushed over with a few martial sages. They did not know what was going on underground. They were moving forward cautiously and looking at the cracks in the rock layer. When they saw Yun Yao, Yi Lu Shui and the others were filled with murderous intent. They roared angrily. So they are here. Everyone, let's kill them. Following the furious roar, the seven martial saints brandished their swords and sabers at the same time, charging towards Yun Yao without any regard for their own safety. Yun Yao's face was cold as determination flashed across her eyes. Without hesitation, she went up to meet him. "Chen, Yaya, let's work together and help your father hold on for 100 breaths," she said to the two children in her womb through divine sense. Chen and Yaya's tender voices rang in her mind. "Okay, mother. Don't worry, mother. We will not let father down." In the next moment, Yun Yao's body lit up with bright starlight. She was as dazzling as a full moon. She held the silver moon dual swords and drew hundreds of halos with all her might. Swoosh! Swoosh! The huge starlight halos suddenly merged together and formed two starlight vortexes that were 1,000 feet in radius. The overwhelming saber radiance, sword shadows, and spell attacks hit the silver-white starlight vortexes. Bam! 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 An earth-shattering sound exploded and reverberated in the cave. The ground shook and many cracks appeared on the rock layer. The secret skill that the seven martial sages used did not break the starlight vortexes. The colorful spell shadows were swallowed by the starlight vortexes. In the next moment, a huge five-colored torrent appeared 1,000 feet behind Yun Yao and poured into the gemstone formation. It turned out that the secret skill that she had used was called Diverting Calamity. She had used this secret skill to dissolve the attacks of the seven martial sages and let the gemstone formation bear all the power. Chapter 23:31. The five-colored torrents surged within the gemstone formation. The earth trembled from the impact, and the walls around the cave began to crack. Countless pieces of rubble fell down. It was as if the gemstone formation and the entire cave were under the attack of seven martial sages. However, the cave was extremely sturdy and did not collapse. On the other hand, the various gemstones on the ground, walls, and ceiling lit up with colorful lights after being hit by the five-colored torrent. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. In the blink of an eye, the tens of thousands of gemstones in the cave lit up. The bright and dazzling five-colored brilliance filled the entire cave and turned it into a five-colored world. In front of the stone tomb, Ji Tianxing stared at the five-colored light screen and observed it attentively. His eyes were golden and his brows were tightly knitted as he pondered and deduced a way to break the formation. The gemstones beside him suddenly lit up and turned the surroundings into a five-colored world, waking him up. He turned his head to look at the five-colored gemstones around him and then looked up at the ceiling. It was only now that he had the time and opportunity to observe the gemstone formation. After merely 2 breaths, his expression suddenly changed and his tightly furrowed brows relaxed, revealing an expression of sudden realization. "I see. Martial God Nangong is indeed a genius to have such a wonderful idea. If the world was not sealed by the deities, he could definitely ascend to the upper realm and even become a divine emperor." This thought flashed through Ji Tianxing's mind, and his eyes were filled with joy. The questions that had puzzled him earlier were immediately answered. A complete set of methods to break the formation appeared clearly in his mind. He raised his hands without hesitation and formed a mysterious seal. He quickly shot out golden light and starlight into the five-colored light screen. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Rays of golden and silver light penetrated the five-colored light screen like sharp arrows and quietly changed the structure and veins of the divine formation. Ji Tianxing was so focused on breaking the divine formation that he almost forgot about everything around him. At the same time, Yi Lu Shui, Wu Duantian, and the others had recovered from their shock and started to attack Yun Yao again. 5 lights sky sword, 10 lights cloud splitting blade, wild thunderbolt, 10,000 feather blades. The martial sages roared and swung their swords and sabers to create a sky full of lights and shadows, drowning the entrance of the cave. Yin Yao's expression was extremely solemn. She used all her strength to activate the 2 starlight vortexes and face the attacks. Bam, bam, bam. Dozens of spell shadows were swallowed by the vortex and turned into 2 five-colored torrents that blasted into the gemstone array again. Yin Yao repeated the same trick, once again using the misfortune-diverting secret technique to neutralize everyone's attacks. However, Yi Lu Shui and Wu Duantian were not ordinary people. The two of them remained vigilant and attacked at the last moment. Purple lightning sword, Yi Lu Shui shouted in a low voice. His hands pinched together to form a mysterious purple seal. Suddenly, the small purple sword flew out from between his eyebrows and turned into a huge sword that was hundreds of meters long, stabbing towards Yun Yao. Bam! 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 Although the fist radiance was small, it was extremely condensed and contained the power to destroy heaven and earth. Moreover, the purple light sword and the two-fist radiance successfully avoided the starlight vortexes and reached Yun Yao in an instant. Yun Yao bam! 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 Amidst a deafening boom, the giant purple sword and the two-fist radiances collided head-on with her, sending her flying. Puff! Her face immediately turned pale, and she opened her mouth and spat out a jet of dark red blood. She flew in an arc in the air. After rolling for more than 10 rounds, she fell into the gem formation thousands of feet away. Her injuries were even more severe now. Her internal organs were cracked, and both her arms were fractured. When she stood up from the ground, she coughed a few times. The blood that flowed out of her mouth was mixed with pieces of her internal organs. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Yi Lu Shui, Wu Duantian, and the others rushed towards the gap without any regard for their own safety. They wanted to enter the cave. Once they entered, Yin Yao would not be able to stop them, let alone stop them from attacking Ji Tianxing. Yin Yao bam! She was so angry that her eyes almost popped out. Don't even think about breaking in. She shouted in a low voice and rushed to the entrance without any regard for her own safety. She waved her sword with all her might, creating a sky full of cold stars. Swoosh! Swoosh! More than 300 starlight sword radiances formed a starlight sword formation and sealed the entire entrance. Yi Lu Shui and the rest were stopped. They could only wave their swords and sabers to block the starlight sword formation. Bam! 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 The saber radiance and sword radiance collided. The deafening sound echoed in the cave. Yin Yao's starlight sword formation was immediately destroyed by the many martial sages. Then, everyone used their secret techniques to attack her from all sides. After a few breaths, she was sent flying again and smashed into the gem formation with blood all over her body. However, she did not care about her injuries. She got up and charged into the cave again. Heavenly fire, astral wind. She did not hesitate to use the power of the divine pearl to release surging heavenly fire and astral winds to seal the cave entrance. Yi Lu Shui and the rest were forced to retreat again. They could only fight back with all their might. Then, Yin Yao was sent flying for the third time. Her injuries were even more severe. She looked even more pathetic. Her hair bun was untied. Her blood-stained long hair was spread out and covered her blood-stained face. Her white dress had turned dark red. It was soaked in blood. Her strength was rapidly weakening. Her divine soul, aura, was also becoming more and more chaotic. Obviously, she was at the end of her tether. She could not hold on any longer. However, she was still unyielding. She charged into the cave entrance like a madwoman and tried her best to stop the martial sages. As time passed, she was constantly pushed back and sent flying by the martial sages. 4 times, 5 times, 6 times, 7 times. Every time she was pushed back, her injuries were more severe. She was one step closer to death. However, she was not afraid of death. She got up again and stubbornly charged into the cave entrance. In the end, her body was a bloody mess. She was in an extremely miserable state. However, she still persisted in her stubbornness and continued to get up and fight. The martial sages outside the cave were shocked. Even Yi Lu Shui and Wu Duantian had strange expressions on their faces. They secretly gasped, "Oh my God, is this woman crazy? What kind of magic does Ji Tianxing have? Why is Yin Yao so willing to risk her life to protect him?" Tantai Xian who was in the crowd, pretended to attack with her sword. However, she was actually feeling extremely conflicted. She stared at Yun Yao and thought to herself, no wonder he married this woman. No wonder he doesn't care about other women. This Yun Yao. Not only does she have an unparalleled appearance and temperament, but she also loves him to the core. Finally, 80 breaths passed. Yun Yao was sent flying for the 9th time. Swoosh! She flew 80 miles in the air and fell into the gemstone array with a thud. This time, she could not stand up again. Chapter 23:32. Yun Yao, who was covered in blood, lay motionless on the ground. The gravel and dust buried half of her body. Her originally jet-black hair was soaked in blood and wrapped around her face. She persisted until the last moment and used up her last bit of power. Unfortunately, she still failed in the end. It was impossible for her to stop Yi Lu Shui, Wu Duantian, and more than 10 martial sages on her own. Fortunately, she did not lose her life on the spot. However, her injuries were too severe and she fainted. Once she fell, no one could stop Yi Lu Shui and the rest from attacking. Swoosh! Swoosh! More than 10 martial sages swarmed into the cave. Yi Lu Shui, Wu Duantian, Yuan Zhen, and the rest looked into the depths of the cave. In front of the stone tomb, Ji Tianxing was still casting spells to break the array. He had reached the final stage. Everyone could see that the 5-colored light shield that enveloped the stone tomb had become thin and transparent. It was about to collapse. Yi Lu Shui shouted coldly, Ji Tianxing die. As soon as he finished speaking, he dashed toward Ji Tianxing. Wu Duantian and Yuan Zhen followed closely behind him. 6 other martial sages followed closely behind. Their target was Ji Tianxing. They would kill Ji Tianxing first and then snatch the treasures in the stone tomb. Only one martial sage, who was severely injured, did not follow the rest to attack Ji Tianxing. He held the crescent moon blades and pounced toward Yun Yao with a ferocious look. In the previous battle, he had been severely injured by Yun Yao and his body had almost been destroyed. Now that Yun Yao was severely injured and unconscious, it was the best time for him to take revenge. Swoosh! In the blink of an eye, the martial sage of the foreign tribe rushed to Yun Yao's side and slashed with his crescent moon blades. Yun Yao was about to be dismembered by the crescent moon blades, and 3 lives would be lost. However, at this critical moment, a pink ray of light suddenly attacked from the side. Swoosh! The martial sage was caught off guard and was hit by the pink light. His body stiffened, and he stood rooted to the ground. The pink light drilled into his body and invaded his sea of consciousness. A powerful soul-sucking force burst out, instantly causing his mind to become muddled and his eyes to become misty. The 2 sabers that were raised high also stopped in midair. Then, the charming and enchanting Tantai Xian strolled to Yun Yao's side. She waved her hand and sent the muddle-headed foreign race martial saint flying. She looked down at Yun Yao, who was lying on the ground, and muttered with a complicated expression, Yun Yao, you actually occupied his heart, became his wife, and even got pregnant with his child. You were the luckiest woman in the world. Originally, I was the one who envied you the most and wanted you dead the most. But you can't die, you have to live. Only a woman like you is worthy of him, worthy of bearing his children. Live on. Tantai Xian sighed deeply and waved her hand to release a dazzling light. Shwa! The dazzling light wrapped around the unconscious Yun Yao and flew out of the cave. Finally, she flew into the dark green lake and was wrapped in the dazzling light as she floated into the distance. In the cave, Ji Tianxing formed a hand seal with both hands and formed the last seal. Crack! Crack! The 5-colored light shield that enveloped the stone tomb completely collapsed and dissipated. However, at this moment, Yi Lu Shui, Wu Duantian, Yuan Zhen, and the rest rushed to Ji Tianxing's side. Ji Tianxing, go to hell. It's all over now. Your life is mine, and so are your treasures. Everyone laughed excitedly and waved their sabers and swords, slashing toward Ji Tianxing fiercely. More than 50 saber lights and sword shadows drowned Ji Tianxing's figure. Ji Tianxing had just finished casting the spell and did not have time to block or counterattack. He was about to be hit by the sky full of secret spells. Even if he did not die, he would be severely injured. At this critical moment, he wanted to cast the Armillary Heaven Secret technique and transform into heaven and earth to avoid this disaster. But what he didn't expect was that a pink brilliance would suddenly rush out from the side. Shwa! A graceful golden figure was in the pink light. She was wearing a long golden dress that trailed on the ground. Her skin was fair and beautiful, and her figure was graceful and enchanting. She looked back and smiled charmingly. It was Tantai Xian. At this moment, her delicate and beautiful face no longer had the faint smile that seduced all living things. Instead, it was a resolute expression that showed that she was ready to die. Before Ji Tianxing could react, she opened her arms and blocked in front of him. An overwhelming pink light gushed out from her body. That was the power that she had cultivated for her entire life. The majestic enchantress soul dissipation technique condensed into a huge pink light wall and blocked Ji Tianxing. Bam! Boom! 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 The overwhelming saber light and sword shadows all blasted on the pink light wall. Dazzling multicolored splendor burst out, and a destructive shockwave also erupted, engulfing the entire cave. A deafening explosion shook the heavens. The cave within a radius of a few hundred miles shook violently. The ground and rock walls cracked, and countless rocks collapsed from the ceiling. Tantai Xian had used all her strength to successfully block the attacks of the martial sages. However, the pink light wall was smashed into pieces. Tantai Xian was also blasted away. She spat out blood and crashed into the ruins. Puff! She was lying on the ground, covered in blood, and her body was twitching continuously. Half of her head was smashed, and only half of her face was left. Her divine soul was also shattered. Although she was not dead yet, she was on the verge of death. Even the God realm could not save someone whose divine soul was shattered. This scene not only stunned Ji Tianxing, but also stunned him. Even Yi Lu Shui, Wu Duantian, Yuan Zhen, and the others were shocked and frowned in confusion. The crowd couldn't understand. Wasn't that charming woman from one of the 3 great clans? Wasn't she ordered to kill Ji Tianxing? Why would she step forward at the critical moment and block the fatal blow for Ji Tianxing? For a moment, the martial sages looked at each other, not knowing what was going on. Ji Tianxing came to his senses and quickly flew to Tantai Xian, Er's side, and picked her up from the ground. Looking down at half of her face that was covered in blood, Ji Tianxing frowned and asked, "Tantai Xian, are you crazy?" Tantai Xian lay in his arms and looked up at his face. She squeezed out a satisfied smile. He, you're finally willing to hug me. I knew that I would be able to fulfill my wish." Ji Tianxing frowned even more and shouted, "Is it worth it to sacrifice your life just to fulfill your wish?" "Yes." Tantai Xian, Er's voice was soft and weak, but her tone was firm. "I love you deeply, but I can't accompany you in this life. Even if I die, I will have endless regrets. Since I can't get your heart, I will engrave myself in your memory. I want you to remember me forever and never forget me in this life. Kenshin, you must remember, I, Tantai Xian, can also die for you." When she said the last sentence, her voice was so weak that it could not be heard. Then, her divine soul shattered inch by inch, and her vitality dissipated quickly. She was completely dead. It's a new week. Brothers, please vote for me. Thank you. Chapter 23:33. Tantai Xian was dead. Ji Tianxing's brows were tightly knitted as he had mixed feelings in his heart. He had never expected that Tantai Xian, who had always been crazy, would sacrifice herself to save him. Even though he did not like Tantai Xian, he was still deeply touched when he saw her die for him. His heart was filled with rage, and his entire body was filled with violent killing intent. A star flame gushed out from his palm and enveloped Tantai Xian's body. Swoosh! Sparks rose fiercely and soon burned Tantai Xian into ashes. Tantai Er's divine soul and body were destroyed. She had truly died. Ji Tianxing stood up slowly and turned to look at Yi Lu Shui and the others. His eyes were as cold as ice and filled with killing intent. Yi Lu Shui, Wu Duantian, and the others had already come to their senses. Tantai Er's sacrifice to save Ji Tianxing was just an accident to them. Or rather, it was just an interlude. At this moment, everyone's attention was focused on what was behind Ji Tianxing. On the huge stone tomb. The stone tomb, which had lost the protection of the five-colored light shield, shook violently and many cracks appeared on its surface. Kacha-kacha. The crisp sound of something breaking rang out, and it was especially ear-piercing in the quiet cave. As the black boulder continued to crack, a dazzling golden light shone from the cracks. Rumble. The stone tomb shook more and more violently, causing the entire cave to shake. Many cracks appeared on the walls, and the ceiling of the cave kept collapsing. Large pieces of rocks and soil fell down. Seeing this, Yi Lu Shui, Wu Duantian, and the others opened their eyes wide. Everyone was filled with anticipation as they cheered and discussed excitedly. Oh my God, that stone tomb actually cracked open. What a dazzling golden light. What a powerful aura. The stone tomb is about to explode. Is something going to rush out? Oh my God, is there an ancient ferocious beast hiding in the stone tomb? Could it be that Marshal God Nangong is not dead and is going to climb out of the ancient tomb? Many martial sages growled in disgust. They were both excited and worried. Everyone even temporarily forgot about the mission to kill Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing was also alarmed and turned to look at the ancient tomb behind him. He frowned when he saw the tomb shattering and the golden light gushing out from the cracks. What a powerful divine aura. Could it be that a divine artifact is about to be born? If Yi Lu Shui, Wu Duantian, and the others were not around, he would definitely hope that this was the scene of a divine artifact being born. After all, he had come to the illusory sky secret realm for the god artifacts. However, in the current situation, the birth of a divine artifact might not be a good thing. What's more, Yin Yao's whereabouts were unknown, and no one knew whether she was dead or alive. While everyone was distracted by the stone tomb, Ji Tianxing quietly retreated. He released his divine sense to envelop the entire cave, searching for Yin Yao's whereabouts. However, he searched the cave twice, but to no avail. Deep worry and anxiety filled his mind. He couldn't wait to rush out of the cave and find Yin Yao immediately. However, Yi Lu Shui and Wu Duantian had already charged over when he had just flown 1,000 feet away. You still want to escape? Dream on. This will be your burial ground. Accept your fate. The two of them shouted angrily at the same time as they brandished their swords, creating a sky full of brilliance that shrouded Ji Tianxing's figure. Ji Tianxing's charge was blocked, and he could only use the burial of heaven to block the attack. Bam! 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 The sky full of sword radiance collided with a deafening sound that reverberated in the cave. A violent shockwave spread out and swept across a radius of 200 miles, stirring up countless rocks and dust. The cave that had already collapsed became even more chaotic. Although Ji Tianxing had blocked Yi Lu Shui and Wu Duantian's attack, he was sent flying back 1,000 feet. However, he was blasted back thousands of feet, and the stone tomb fell from the sky. At the same time, the huge stone tomb collapsed completely, and rocks burst out everywhere. A ball of dazzling golden light, like a scorching golden sun, flew out from the collapsed stone tomb. Swoosh! The golden sun, with the power to destroy the heavens and earth, blasted towards Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing was about to be blasted into pieces by the sun. At this critical moment, he did not hesitate to use his trump card. Secret skill of chaos. With a low shout, his body immediately disappeared. He instantly blended into the heavens and earth, becoming one with the cave that was a few hundred miles wide. The huge golden sun, like an aurora, streaked across the sky and continued to blast towards Yi Lu Shui and Wu Duantian. Seeing the sun flying towards him, Yi Lushui was not shocked. Instead, he was overjoyed and laughed excitedly. Ha ha ha! There really is a divine weapon. This is mine. As he laughed, he cast a spell and cast a 5-colored giant palm, grabbing towards the sun. Bam! In the deafening sound, the 5-colored giant palm was shattered into pieces. The golden sun's power did not diminish at all and hit Yi Lushui with another boom. Blarg! Yi Lushui's face was as white as a sheet. He opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood. Wu Duantian, who was not far from him, was also hit by the golden sun. He spat out a mouthful of blood and flew out. Immediately after, the golden sun blasted towards the crowd with a scorching heat wave and a destructive power. Yuan Zhen and the other martial sages' faces changed drastically. The joy and excitement in their hearts turned into fear. Get out of the way. Retreat. Even Lord Yi is injured. We can't take this head on. The crowd shouted in panic and tried their best to retreat. However, they were still too slow. Bam, 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 bam. One after another, the martial sages were hit by the sun and were sent flying. In just a few breaths, 8 martial sages had been sent flying and landed in the ruins with blood all over their bodies. The huge rocks that fell from the ceiling hit the ground and buried the martial sages. Yuan Zhen was lucky enough to escape. He hid in the corner of the cave and was not hit by the golden sun. Swoosh! The golden sun flew through half of the cave and flew out of the opening. The chaotic cave was collapsing even faster. The gemstone array was completely destroyed. Thousands of gemstones rolled on the ground and were buried in the ruins. In another 100 breaths of time at most, the cave within a radius of several hundred miles would be completely destroyed. At that time, the lake water above would pour down, and this place would become a ruin at the bottom of the lake. Seeing this, Yuan Zhen quickly flew out of the opening and chased after the golden sun. Yi Lushui, Wu Duantian, and the rest endured their injuries and climbed out of the ruins. They rushed out of the cave. The cave is going to collapse. Everyone run. The sacred artifact has flown away. Everyone, go after it. We must get the sacred artifact. The few martial sages who were in a sorry state shouted as they rushed out of the cave. In just 20 breaths' time, all the martial sages had left the cave and chased after the sacred artifact. It was only then that Ji Tianxing appeared in the broken stone tomb. Chapter 23:34. Originally, the stone tomb was tall and bulging. After it was broken, it became a huge pit with a radius of thousands of feet. The pit was dark and gloomy. It was filled with broken stones and dozens of colorful gems. It looked very ordinary. It was just a pile of ruins without any bright spots. However, when Ji Tianxing glanced at the entrance of the cave, a disdainful sneer appeared on his face. Yi Lushui and the other martial sages were attracted by the golden sun. Everyone left the cave to chase and fight for the divine weapon. Only Ji Tianxing knew that there was a treasure hidden in the seemingly ordinary ruins. He jumped into the pit and stared at the pile of rocks. He waved his hand and sent out a few waves of energy to sweep away the broken stones. After a while, the broken stones in front of him were all cleaned up. There was a faint golden light in the black soil at the bottom of the pit. Ji Tianxing bent down and reached out to grab the golden light. Lifting it up, he caught a half-meter long golden light in his palm. Amidst the glittering golden light, there was a dark golden dagger. The knife was only 3 inches long and 1 inch wide. It was simple and exquisite. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary decorative golden saber. After all, the blade was unsharpened. The entire knife was exquisite and beautiful. However, Ji Tianxing held the golden knife and looked at it carefully. He smiled with satisfaction. It is indeed the masterpiece of martial god Nangong. It is a high-grade weapon and contains 99 transformations. There was no doubt that the golden knife was not an ornament. It was a genuine divine weapon. Moreover, it was far superior to ordinary divine weapons. It was of high quality. He turned the knife gently and found 2 sesame-sized words engraved on the blade. After looking at them carefully, He recognized that they were the words, God slaying. God slaying flying knife? Interesting. Ji Tianxing praised in his heart. He used his energy to force out a drop of golden blood from his right fingertip and dripped it on the flying knife. Instantly, the flying knife shone with an even more dazzling light and an extremely sharp aura. Ji Tianxing made hand seals and executed a secret technique to quickly refine the god-slaying flying knife. At this moment, a large part of the cave collapsed. Rocks and soil from the ceiling of the cave poured down with a rumbling sound. There was also the raging lake, water pouring down from the crack. Ji Tianxing frowned and hurriedly stepped over the ruins and left the cave. Shua! After drilling out of the hole, he quickly left the underground and entered the dark green lake. The bottom of the lake was dark, and loud, rumbling noises could be heard from the ground. The endless lake water was swallowed up by the collapsed cave, forming a huge whirlpool. Ji Tianxing quickly rushed out of the vortex and flew high into the sky. Standing above the lake, he looked coldly towards the north. On the silver grassland, 200 miles away from the lake, Yi Lu Shui and many martial saints were besieging the golden sun. The golden blazing sun had shrunk significantly. It was now only 10 feet in radius. Its radiance was much dimmer, and its power had also weakened. As if it had a mind of its own, it rampaged in the sky, trying to escape from the encirclement. However, many martial sacred realm experts surrounded it and tried their best to stop it. Even though it resisted with all its might and kept sending the martial saints around it flying, it was useless. Everyone was blinded by the divine artifact. They were so excited that their blood vessels were expanding, and they did not care about their own injuries at all. Even if they had to sacrifice their lives, they had to obtain the golden blazing sun. At this rate, the power of the golden blazing sun would be greatly reduced in 15 minutes at most. Ji Tianxing looked at the crowd and temporarily suppressed his murderous intent. He released his divine sense and covered a radius of 1,000 miles, quickly searching for Yun Yao's whereabouts. Soon, his divine sense sensed that Yun Yao was about 1,500 miles south of him. He quickly turned and flew towards the south, thinking in confusion, isn't the center of the lake 1,500 miles south? Why would Yao Yao be there? Shua! He streaked across the sky like a beam of light and soon flew 1,500 miles away. When he reached the sky above the dark green lake, his divine sense immediately detected that Yun Yao was in the depths of the lake. He quickly dived into the lake and rushed to the bottom of the lake at lightning speed. When he got closer, he saw that Yun Yao was wrapped in a ball of pink light and was lying quietly at the bottom of the lake. Her body was stained with blood, and her white dress had turned blood red. Her long hair was loose and covered her face. Seeing that she had suffered such serious injuries, Ji Tianxing only felt a piercing pain in his heart. Strong self-blame and anger welled up in his heart. He hated himself for not being strong enough to protect Yun Yao and let her and their child suffer such pain. He hated Yi Lu Shui, Yuan Zhen, and the others even more for being so vicious and injuring Yun Yao to such an extent. Fortunately, Yun Yao was not killed. She was only unconscious. Ji Tianxing was about to pick up Yun Yao when he noticed that she was wrapped in a layer of pink light. The pink light was getting fainter and fainter, emitting a familiar aura. He immediately frowned and murmured with mixed feelings, Tantai Xian it was you who saved Yun Yao and sent her here. This was something he hadn't expected as well, and it caused complicated feelings to surge out from his heart while a wisp of guilt surged out from within him. The scene before Tantai Xian Er's death appeared in his mind. What she said at that time rang in his mind again. Since I can't get your heart, I will engrave it in your memory. I will make you worry about me forever and never forget me in this life. Ji Tianxing slowly closed his eyes and clenched his fists secretly. After a while, he collected his thoughts and opened his eyes again. There was only endless coldness and killing intent left in his clear and deep eyes. He formed a spell with both hands and shot out hundreds of colorful lights, forming an oval-shaped shield that enveloped Yun Yao. Not only could this shield protect Yun Yao, but it could also heal her injuries and replenish her dermic powers. Then, Ji Tianqing put Yun Yao into the sword world. After settling Yun Yao down, he quickly left the bottom of the lake and flew back in the direction he came from. Not long after, he returned to the lakeside. In the sky above the grassland, Yi Lu Shui, Wu Duantian, and the others were still surrounding the ball of golden light. The golden light had shrunk to about 30 feet. It was no longer glaring, and its power was not as terrifying. One could vaguely see that there was a golden ball the size of a fist in the golden light. It was unknown what it was. Ji Tianqing looked coldly at the martial sages, and a murderous intent surged in his eyes. "Everyone must die," he murmured softly. Holding the god-slaying flying dagger in his right hand, he charged forward. Swoosh! He teleported 100 miles away and appeared behind a martial sage. He waved his right hand and shot out the god-slaying flying dagger. Swoosh! The 3-inch golden flying dagger flashed across the sky at an incredible speed. Chapter 23:35. Bam! The head of the foreign race, Martial Saint, exploded with a bang. Like a smashed watermelon, red juice splattered all over the sky. Not only did his physical body die, even his soul was shattered into dozens of pieces by the golden flying dagger. This 6th-stage realm foreign race, Martial Saint, was instantly killed. He did not even have the time to scream. Even until the moment of his death, he did not know what was going on. The god-slaying flying dagger's power was so terrifying. Ji Tianqing was very satisfied with this. He expressionlessly executed the technique and controlled the god-slaying flying dagger to attack another martial saint. Swoosh! A bright golden light flashed across the sky. The martial saints who were surrounding the golden light ball were all stunned when they saw the martial saint's head exploding. No one knew what had happened. Even Yi Lu Shui and Wu Duantian were filled with astonishment. Their eyes were filled with astonishment. But at this moment, the golden light suddenly appeared in front of Helian Wuzhua. Helian Wuzhua's pupils constricted, his eyes filled with fear and despair. He reacted quickly and subconsciously shrunk his neck and turned his head to one side. However, it was all in vain. Bam! Another muffled sound rang out. The god-slaying flying dagger pierced through his forehead and flew out from the back of his head. His entire head exploded and blood splattered all over the sky. The dark red blood was mixed with a few pieces of soul fragments. Apparently, Helian Wuzhua's soul was also shattered and he died on the spot. Until his death, he did not see clearly what the golden light was that killed him. The god-slaying flying dagger's speed was so fast and terrifying. Even if he was prepared and wanted to avoid it, it would be useless. It was impossible to guard against it. Helian Wuzhua's headless body fell from the sky and landed on the silver grassland with a plop. The gushing blood dyed the grassland a dark red. Until now, Yi Lu Shui, Wu Duantian, and the rest finally regained their senses. Everyone's face was filled with fear as they roared in anger and cursed in fear. It's Ji Tianqing. He's the one behind this. Quickly disperse. Everyone disperse. Damned bastard. What kind of magical treasure did he use? What the hell is that? Kill him. We must kill him. Immediately, the martial saints scattered in all directions, fleeing for their lives in a panic. Under the threat of death, everyone temporarily gave up on surrounding the golden ball of light. No one wanted to become Ji Tianqing's next target and have their heads explode for no reason. It was too terrifying. Ji Tianqing remained expressionless. His eyes were as cold as ice. His entire body was burning with blood-red flames, which were condensed from anger and killing intent. Swish, swish. He formed a seal with both hands and quickly waved them in front of him. The elusive god-slaying flying dagger flashed with golden light again and disappeared in the sky. Swish! This time, the god-slaying flying dagger locked onto Yi Lu Shui and stabbed towards his forehead. When the flying dagger was still 30 miles away from Yi Lu Shui, he had already sensed the danger of death. His divine soul turned cold. At the moment of life and death, Yi Lushui performed his teleportation without hesitation, moving 10 miles to the side. Swish! Almost at the same time as he teleported, the god-slaying flying dagger brushed past him. Blood spurted out from his temples. His left ear was cut off and thrown into the sky. The god-slaying flying dagger was so close to smashing his head. At that moment, he had brushed past death and was covered in cold sweat. His entire body was stiff and cold. He could not even feel pain. Yi Lushui was lucky to have escaped death. However, a martial saint 10 miles behind him was unlucky. Before the martial saint could react, the flying dagger pierced his forehead. His head exploded with a bang. A few pieces of his divine soul were mixed in with the blood and flesh that splattered all over the sky. The headless corpse fell and landed on the grassland with a plop. The third martial saint died, tragically under the god-slaying flying dagger. Unparalleled fear filled everyone's mind. The martial saints turned pale and trembled all over. Although they were alert and tried their best to dodge, they could not escape death. This was too terrifying. Under the huge pressure, the martial saints almost went crazy. They charged at Ji Tianxing as if they were committing suicide. I'll fight you to the death. Even if I die, I'll drag you down with me. Everyone, let's kill Ji Tianxing together. Wu Duantian, Yuan Zhen, and the others roared angrily. They waved their swords and sabers and attacked together. Suddenly, the overwhelming saber light and sword shadows shrouded Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing did not panic. He struck out with the golden dragon claw with his left hand and the burial of heaven with his right hand. He performed a unique sword technique to block everyone's attacks. Bam! 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 The saber light and sword shadows collided, creating a loud sound and a dazzling brilliance. Everyone fought fiercely, forcing Ji Tianxing to continuously retreat. However, he could multitask. While blocking everyone's attacks, he could also use his divine thought to control the god-slaying flying dagger. Swish! Golden light flashed and death descended. Marshal Saint Qing Shan, who was attacking crazily, was suddenly stabbed in the temple by the god-slaying flying dagger. In the next moment, his head exploded, spraying blood and flesh. The martial saint closest to him had blood splattered all over his face. He was so scared that he trembled all over. However, the more frightened everyone was, the more desperate they were to attack. They swore to kill Ji Tianxing on the spot. The battle was still going on. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Yi Lushui quietly left the battlefield. He did not participate in the siege. He had already seen that the golden light that killed the martial saints was a 3-inch long flying dagger. He had never seen that flying dagger before. Ji Tianxing had also never used it. Yi Lushui guessed that the flying dagger must have been obtained from the stone tomb. It was most likely a divine artifact left behind by martial god Nangong. Since that was the case, it was meaningless for him to join forces with the others to attack Ji Tianxing. Not only could they not kill Ji Tianxing, but they might also be killed by the flying dagger. Therefore, Yi Lushui placed his hope on the golden ball. Only a divine artifact could deal with a divine artifact. No one intercepted the golden ball. It had already flown further and further away. Yi Lushui chased desperately for 800 miles before he caught up with the golden ball. However, he discovered that 3 old men in ragged clothes with miserable appearances were rushing towards him, their faces filled with joy. These 3 old men were the 3 sages of the Eastern Sea. Ever since Yi Lushui and the others besieged Ji Tianxing and his wife, they had been watching the battle nearby. Now that they saw the golden ball that everyone was fighting over flying towards them, they joined forces to use a capturing technique in an attempt to catch it. Seeing this, Yi Lushui suddenly became furious and shouted with a murderous aura, "Get lost! That's mine!" While roaring, Yi Lushui waved his sword and slashed out 3 dazzling golden swords. The divine artifact was right in front of them. How could the 3 sages of the Eastern Sea give it up? The 3 of them also waved their weapons and attacked Yi Lushui with hideous smiles. Hee hee, It belongs to whoever grabs it. The treasure left behind by martial god Nangong belongs to everyone. Don't even think about taking it for yourself. Chapter 23:36. Ever since they entered the illusory sky secret realm, the three saints of the Eastern Sea had been stuck in a wall. Not only did they not get any benefits, but they also got rejected and ended up in a miserable state. Now, they finally had a chance. They would fight Yi Lu Shui to the end, even if they had to risk their lives. Bang! 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 The sky-covering light and shadows of spells collided with a deafening sound. The three saints of the Eastern Sea joined forces and blocked Yi Lu Shui's attack, forcing him to retreat 10 miles. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the three of them used the capture technique again and tried to grab the golden ball. However, the mountain-sized palm was shattered into pieces as soon as it touched the golden ball. Boom! With a muffled sound, the violent force of the impact sent the three saints of the Eastern Sea flying. The three of them spat out blood and fell on the grassland in a sorry state. Their injuries were even more severe. Seeing this, Yi Lu Shui grinned. Ha ha! You three toads dare to fight with me for the treasure? As he laughed, he rushed to the side of a purple-robed elder and stabbed with his sword. Whoosh! 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 Dozens of Dian sword lights pierced the elder like dragons out of the sea. Instantly, blood and flesh splattered. A large hole appeared in the purple-robed elder's chest and abdomen. Half of his body disappeared. He let out a shrill scream as he was sent flying for more than 10 miles. The other two rushed over and attacked Yi Lu Shui desperately. Yi Lu Shui was fighting against two alone, but he was still very brave. His left hand struck out with a giant purple palm, while his right hand swung his sword. Bang! 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 The two sides fought fiercely in the sky. Their figures flashed and danced. It was too much for the eyes to take in. After more than 10 moves, the winner was finally decided. Yi Lu Shui was severely injured. There were a few hideous wounds on his chest and back. They were so deep that his bones could be seen. Red blood gushed out and dyed him red. He looked miserable and miserable. The other two elders were even more miserable. One was cut in half at the waist while the other was ground into meat paste. Both of their physical bodies were destroyed, leaving only their souls behind. The three saints of the Eastern Sea no longer dared to have any hope. They could only run away. Yi Lu Shui wanted to chase after them, but the golden ball had flown far away. He had no choice but to give up on pursuing the three sages of the Eastern Sea and turn to chase after the ball of golden light. Dozens of breaths later, he chased after it for 1,000 miles and stopped the golden ball again. He wasn't as stupid as the three saints of the Eastern Sea. He did not try to capture it. Instead, he swung his sword and slashed at the golden ball of light. Pung, pung, pung. The sword lights that blotted out the sky and covered the earth all slashed at the golden balls of light one after another, producing a series of muffled sounds and bursting out golden light all over the sky. Yi Lu Shui couldn't do anything to the golden ball, let alone break it. However, after he slashed 300 times, the ball of golden light completely collapsed. The so-called divine artifact had also revealed its true colors. It was indeed a fist-sized ball. It was dark gold in color, and its surface was as smooth as jade. It looked like a metal ball. However, the inside of the sphere was sparkling and translucent like glass. The ball floated in the sky, its golden light completely restrained, and it didn't look very eye-catching. But Yi Lu Shui stared at it greedily, and his eyes were full of excitement. What a pure and powerful divine aura. This is definitely a divine artifact. Yi Lu Shui had followed martial god Tianju for many years and was very familiar with divine power. He had also used the Tying soul-splitting ruler before, so he was no stranger to the aura of a divine artifact. Moreover, he could tell that the quality and power of this golden ball far surpassed the Tying soul-splitting ruler. The quality of this golden ball has surpassed the Tying soul-splitting ruler. Isn't this a middle-grade divine artifact? Ha ha! With this golden ball, I can crush all the martial saints. I even have a great chance of breaking through to the divine state. Yi Lushui murmured excitedly. He quickly stretched out his hands and held the golden ball in his palms. The golden ball was very calm and did not struggle or resist. Therefore, he used his power to force a drop of his heart's blood from his fingertip and dripped it on the golden ball. Suddenly, the golden ball emitted a dazzling golden light, and a vast and mighty divine aura fluctuated. Swoosh! As if the golden ball had a life of its own, it immediately melted into a dark gold liquid and flowed through Yi Liushui's hands to his entire body. In the blink of an eye, the dark gold liquid covered his entire body, turning him into a golden man. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. A dazzling golden light flashed, and the golden liquid solidified, turning into a majestic, exquisite, and magnificent armor. This armor fit Yi Liushui's body perfectly. It protected him from head to toe, leaving only his eyes and mouth exposed. Yi Liushui's body shook, and he suddenly laughed in surprise. Ha ha ha! I didn't expect this divine artifact to be a set of armor. Ji Tianxing, oh Ji Tianxing, let's see how you fight with me this time. Yi Lushui was very proud. He twisted his limbs and moved his body. The armor looked heavy and sturdy, but when he wore it, it was as light as a feather. It did not affect him at all. Yi Lushui was very satisfied. He quickly flew across the sky and flew back in the direction he came from. Swoosh! With the help of the dark gold armor, he seemed to have endless energy, and his flying speed was doubled. In just 15 minutes, he had flown 3,000 miles and returned to the battlefield. However, when Yi Lushui saw the situation of the battlefield, he was dumbfounded. The silver grassland within 1,000 miles had become a mess of ruins. There were gullies and deep pits everywhere. In the deep brown pit, one could vaguely see blood stains and many broken limbs. A few martial sages' corpses were scattered all over the ruins. Some of their heads had exploded, but their bodies were still intact. Some of their limbs were broken, and their bodies had been cut into two. There were only 3 people who were still alive and could still stand in the sky. One of them was Ji Tianxing, who was covered in blood and had messy long hair. The other 2 were Wu Duantian and Yuan Zhen. Other than the 3 of them, the other martial sages were all dead. Ji Tianxing had killed all of them. Wu Duantian was covered in blood. His left arm had been cut off, and his shoulder bone was exposed. Blood kept flowing out. His face was covered in blood, and his body was bent. He was panting heavily. As for Yuan Zhen, both of his legs had been cut off, and Ji Tianxing was holding him by the neck with his left hand. This scene made Yi Lushui frown. His eyes were filled with hatred. Ji Tianxing, you bastard! Let go of the first prince. He glared daggers at Ji Tianxing as he roared in a hoarse voice. Ji Tianxing slowly turned his head and looked at him with an icy cold gaze. Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows when he saw him wearing a set of exquisite and beautiful dark gold armor. His lips curled into a sinister sneer. He, you really got the divine artifact. I didn't expect it to be a set of armor. Yi Lushui stared at him ferociously and did not say a word. Although he was wearing the divine artifact armor, he was not happy at all. He did not dare to show off. This was because he had already guessed Ji Tianxing's plan. As expected, Ji Tianxing glanced at Yuan Zhen, who was on the verge of fainting, and said coldly, Yuan Zhen, ask him to hand over the armor, and I will spare your life. Chapter 23:37. Yi Lushui had always been cunning. When he saw Yuan Zhen being captured, he guessed Ji Tianxing's plan. It was as he had expected. Ji Tianxing used Yuan Zhen's life as a hostage to force him to hand over the divine armor. After all, if he was Ji Tianxing, he would do the same. However, he was now caught in a dilemma. He was martial god Tianju's right-hand man and was loyal to Tianju. Yuan Zhen was martial god Tianju's eldest son and the future successor of the Divine Lord. Logically, he should hand over the divine armor in exchange for Yuan Zhen's life. Otherwise, wouldn't he be a disloyal and unjust person? He would be spurned by Tianju and despised by all the martial artists in the world. But he had spent so much effort to get the divine armor. How could he hand it over so easily? With this divine armor, not only could he dominate the world, but he also had the chance to become a martial god. Once he became a martial god, why would he need to care about martial god Tianju? It would not be a problem for him to establish his own sect and create a fourth divine kingdom. Thinking of this, Yi Lushui was in a dilemma. His eyes shone with a cold light. He remained silent and did not speak. Ji Tianxing could obviously guess his thoughts. He sneered. Yi Lushui, on one side is the divine armor that you just got. On the other side is your master's eldest son, the future divine kingdom master. Which is more important, the divine armor or Yuanjin's life? You have to think carefully. Hearing what he said, Wu Duantian was filled with indignation. Seeing Yi Lushui hesitate, he hurriedly advised, Sir Yi, don't be muddle-headed. If anything happens to His Highness, you and I will not be able to escape the blame. You only need to hand over the divine armor to Ji Tianxing and you can save His Highness's life. The Divine Lord will remember your contribution and kill Ji Tianxing sooner or later. At that time, the divine armor and the flying knife will still be ours. Wu Duantian was worried that Yi Lushui would lose his mind over the divine armor. At that time, Yuan Zhen would be killed by Ji Tianxing, and he and Yi Lushui would have to suffer the wrath of martial god Tianju. Yi Lushui looked at him with cold eyes and said calmly, Wu Duantian, if this divine armor fell into your hands, would you still be so righteous? Don't forget, the First Highness is the eldest son of the Divine Master. Would Ji Tianxing really dare to kill him? Was he not afraid that the Divine Master would go crazy and tear him to pieces? Even if Ji Tianxing went crazy and killed Yuan Zhen, he would still be able to kill Yuan Zhen. I have a divine armor, and I can kill Ji Tianxing to avenge Yuan Zhen. If I hand over the divine armor, what will we use to stop him? Besides, do you think Ji Tianxing is a trustworthy person? I'm afraid that after I hand over the divine armor, he will not hesitate to kill the three of us. Yi Liushui's words made Wu Duantian speechless. This, Wu Duantian frowned and did not know how to refute. At this time, Ji Tianxing heard their conversation and could not help but sneer. He. Yuan Zhen, did you hear that? Your life is insignificant compared to the divine armor. Yi Lushui would rather let you die than hand over the divine armor. Yuan Zhen, who was almost unconscious, was held in Ji Tianxing's hand like a dead dog. He slowly raised his blood-stained head and opened his eyes with difficulty, looking at Yi Lushui, who was not far away. Commander Yi. Yuan Zhen moved his bloody lips and said in a hoarse voice, You are the most trusted aide of Divine Father, and I also see you as an elder. I don't believe that you are a selfish person who does not care about the big picture. I also don't believe that you don't care about my life or death. You will not disappoint me and Divine Father, right? Yuan Zhen was very smart. He knew that his life was in Yi Liushui's hands, so he did not get angry, nor did he curse or threaten. He tried to persuade him calmly, trying to persuade him with emotion and reason. However, Yi Lushui looked at him calmly and gently shook his head. Your Highness, you overestimate this seat and underestimate Ji Tianxing too much. He is sinister, cunning, despicable, and shameless. He will never keep his promise. Please forgive me for not being able to hand over the divine artifact and hand over the lives of the three of us. But don't worry, I will kill Ji Tianxing and avenge you. Yi Liushui's tone was firm and unwavering. Yuan Zhen's eyes flashed with disappointment and anger. Under the threat of death, he did not want to pretend anymore. He gritted his teeth and cursed. Yi Lushui, you cruel and unscrupulous thing. My divine father trusted you so much and trained you so much, but you bite the hand that feeds you. Are you still human? Do you still have the face to face the people of theocracy? Since they had shed all pretense of cordiality, Yi Lushui did not show any mercy. He said expressionlessly, Your Highness, I am only loyal to the Divine Master, but never to you. Why should I care about your life and death? You scolded me for being cruel and unscrupulous, But have you thought about what you have done? In order to kill Ji Tianxing, you did not hesitate to sacrifice the fourth prince, Yuan Chong. Isn't such a vicious and heinous act even worse than pigs and dogs? Yi Lu Shui, you. Yuan Zhen was so angry that his whole body trembled. Under the anger, he opened his mouth and spat out a stream of blood. Wu Duantian was also anxious. He quickly persuaded Yi Lu Shui, Lord Yi, how can you be so foolish? You know that the first prince is the most valued son of the Divine Master, the future successor. Yi Lu Shui said expressionlessly, so what? The Divine Master has so many divine sons. It is not a big deal if one or two of them die. I am very clear-headed, and I know better than all of you how to choose. Yi Lu Shui was determined not to hand over the divine armor. Ji Tianxing did not want to waste any more time. He sneered and said, Yi Lu Shui, I was right about you. You are so selfish, and yet you still find a dignified reason to do so. You are so shameless. Since you have made up your mind, I will fulfill your wish. Remember, Yuan Zhen is dead because of you. As soon as he finished speaking, he waved his hand and a dazzling starry sword ray slashed at Yuan Zhen. Swoosh! The starry sword ray cut through Yuan Zhen's neck, and fresh blood splattered out. Yuan Zhen's head flew into the sky. His eyes were wide open, and despair filled his eyes. His face was covered in blood, and there were still traces of resentment and hatred left on it. Yuan Zhen's body was decapitated, and his body was destroyed. Ji Tianxing waved his hand again, and a sword ray slashed at Yuan Zhen's head. Wu Duantian's expression changed drastically. He immediately turned into a golden light and rushed toward Ji Tianxing without any regard for his own safety. He wanted to stop Ji Tianxing and save Yuan Zhen. However, he was one step too late. Bam! With a muffled sound, the sword ray slashed at Yuan Zhen's head. Flesh and blood splattered everywhere. The divine soul in his mind was also shattered. It was mixed with flesh and blood and scattered among the ruins. Yuan Zhen's body and divine soul were destroyed. He was completely dead. Yi Lu Shui witnessed everything from the beginning to the end, and his expression did not change. Chapter 23:38. Plop! Yuan Zhen's headless body fell into the ruins with a dull thud. Wu Duantian's heart trembled as well. Looking at the soul fragments floating down from the sky, he was filled with despair, as if he had lost all hope. Yuan Zhen is dead. We're finished. We're all finished. He turned to look at Yi Lu Shui. His eyes were bloodshot, and he roared in a hoarse voice. Yi Lu Shui, you bastard, you've killed me too? Yuan Zhen is dead. The Divine Master will not let us go. Yi Lu Shui glanced at him expressionlessly and said, Why are you so anxious? As long as we kill Ji Tianxing together, won't we be able to make up for our mistakes? Moreover, are you really willing to be under someone else's command forever? If we can reach the divine realm soon, why do we need to rely on others? Wu Duantian did not listen to his provocation. Instead, he cursed even more furiously. Bullshit. Yuan Zhen is dead. The Divine Master will definitely vent his anger on us. But you have the divine armor. What did I get? The root of the problem was here. Yi Lu Shui got the divine armor. Even if he had to bear the infamy and be hated by martial god Tianju, it was worth it. Wu Duantian had to bear martial god Tianju's anger, but he did not get anything. How could he be satisfied? How could he not be furious? Yi Lu Shui licked his lips and revealed a bloodthirsty sneer. Don't be afraid. After we kill Ji Tianxing together, the divine flying dagger will be yours. Wu Duantian was stunned and quickly nodded. All right, remember your promise. The two of them immediately came to an agreement and wanted to work together to deal with Ji Tianxing. In the sky above the ruins, only Ji Tianxing, Wu Duantian, and Yi Lu Shui were left. The surroundings were silent, and the atmosphere was oppressive. Ji Tianxing stared at Yi Lu Shui and sneered. Yi Lu Shui, you're really a cunning old fox. You managed to rope Wu Duantian in with just a few words. Wu Duantian is an idiot. He hasn't improved after 1,000 years. How pitiful. Seeing that he was trying to sow discord, Yi Lu Shui shouted angrily. Ji Tianxing, you knew that you were going to die, so you used such a clumsy method to sow discord between us? Ha ha! Rather than that, why don't you kneel down and beg for mercy? Perhaps I can give you a dignified death. What a joke! Ji Tianxing sneered contemptuously. He waved the sword of burial of heaven and thrust it at him, filling the sky with sword light. Swish! Swish! More than 30 golden swords pierced toward Yi Lushui with unparalleled sharpness. Yi Lushui sneered confidently. He rushed over with great momentum and waved his hand to slap the sword light in the sky. He was wearing a divine armor, and his hands and feet were covered by the divine armor. There was no need for him to use a saint-level treasure sword. Pung pung pung. More than a dozen sword lights pierced Yi Lushui, but they were all blocked by the golden armor. The armor shattered into pieces, creating a series of loud noises. Yi Lushui waved his fists and feet again, shattering more than 20 golden swords. In the blink of an eye, the sword light in the sky shattered and scattered in the sky. Yi Lushui was unscathed. He rushed over with great momentum and waved his fists at Ji Tianxing. Ha ha! With the protection of the divine armor, I am invincible. He laughed wildly and was extremely proud of himself. Ji Tianxing's face was cold. He waved the sword of burial of heaven with all his might and slashed out more than 10 sword lights toward Yi Lushui. On the surface, it looked like he was staring at Yi Lushui. All his attention was on Yi Lushui. But in reality, at the same time that he was slashing out sword lights, his left hand secretly cast a spell and shot out a ray of golden light. Swoosh! The ray of golden light was only 3 inches long. It flashed in the sky and disappeared. The golden swords covered the sky and covered the ray of golden light, making it very hidden. There was no doubt that the god-slaying flying dagger was within the golden light. Its target was beyond Yi Lushui and Wu Duantian's expectations. In the next moment, the elusive god-slaying flying dagger pierced Wu Duantian's head. Wu Duantian was waving his sword and attacking Ji Tianxing from his side. He did not expect Ji Tianxing's main target to be him. In the previous battle, he had been on high alert and had dodged the god-slaying flying dagger 3 times. But this time he could not escape. Bang! With a muffled sound, Wu Duantian's head exploded on the spot and blood splattered everywhere. A few pieces of dark golden spiritual fragments were mixed in with his flesh and blood, scattering across the sky. The headless corpse fell from the sky and smashed into the ruins below with a bang, splashing up a cloud of dirt. A peak martial sage, the leader of the Duantian alliance, Wu Duantian, had fallen. He was once a peak martial sage and a half-step to martial god in the divine martial continent. He was also known as the first martial sage, the person closest to becoming a martial god. But in the end, he still died under the god-slaying flying dagger. All his glory and glory vanished like smoke. Yi Lushui witnessed Wu Duantian's death with his own eyes and was shocked. His face was full of fear. He glared at Ji Tianxing and could not help but shout, Ji Tianxing, you are despicable. Previously, he also thought that Ji Tianxing's main target was him. But now, he knew that he was wrong. He could not see through Ji Tianxing at all. Ji Tianxing looked at him expressionlessly and sneered. Wu Duantian is an idiot. I gave him a chance, but he was stubborn. Now that I have killed him, he only has himself to blame. Only after I get rid of these annoying flies can I focus on killing you. Yi Lushui gritted his teeth, and anger flashed across his eyes. Ji Tianxing, don't think that you can defeat me just because you have a flying dagger. My godly armor and your flying dagger are both divine artifacts left behind by martial god Nangong. They must be of the same quality. Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and sneered. That's right, they are of the same quality. But I know more about divine artifacts than you do. Now let's see if the defense of the godly armor or the power of the flying dagger is stronger. As soon as he finished speaking, he put away the sword of burial of heaven and started to cast a mysterious spell. Divine blood imperial spirit skill. Soon, he formed 2 mysterious seals and forced out 2 drops of golden blood from his index fingers and shot them into the sky. Swoosh! Swoosh! The golden light flashed and instantly swallowed the 2 drops of blood. Suddenly, an invisible, mighty divine power shrouded the area within 1,000 miles. Yi Liushui's pupils constricted and his eyes were filled with fear and worry. Ji Tianxing could cast a secret skill to control the flying dagger and unleash a stronger power. But he had not practiced the corresponding skill. Not only could he not control the godly armor, he could not unleash a stronger power. Swoosh! Just as Yi Liushui was anxious and thinking of a solution, the golden light suddenly appeared in front of him. At the critical moment, he instinctively shrunk his neck and raised his arms to block in front of him. The god-slaying flying dagger was about to miss and fly past his head. Chapter 23:39. Clang! The sound of metal clashing reverberated across a radius of 1,000 miles, shaking the heavens. Yi Liushui was sent flying, tumbling hundreds of miles away. A destructive shockwave spread in all directions, sweeping across 1,000 miles of land. The already devastated ruins were shaved hundreds of feet deep by the shockwave, stirring up sand and dust. This piece of heaven and earth instantly became extremely filthy. The dark green lake not far away was also swept by the shockwave, creating huge waves. Under the huge impact, the lake water shook violently, and the bottom of the lake cracked open again. The area was in complete chaos. Plop! Yi Liushui crashed into the ruins, creating a pit hundreds of feet deep in the ground. Although he wasn't injured, only a dent was left on the dark golden armor in front of his chest. But he was dizzy from the impact, and his divine soul was a little muddled. He shook his head hard and panted for a while before coming to his senses. He shook off the dirt on his body, jumped out of the pit, and charged at Ji Tianxing even more fiercely. Ji Tianxing, did you see that? This is the power of the mystic armor. Don't even think about defeating me. Ji Tianxing stood in the sky, forming a spell with both hands, controlling the god-slaying flying dagger to attack again. He stared coldly at Yi Liushui and immediately noticed something. The dent on Yi Liushui's chest was healing, and it would soon return to normal. As expected of the mystic armor, it has the ability to self-repair. Ji Tianxing murmured, and his eyes became more serious. In the next moment, the 3-inch-long god-slaying flying dagger arrived in front of Yi Liushui. The flying dagger carried endless power, and it was aimed at Yi Liushui's forehead. His entire face was protected by the mystic armor, and only his eyes and mouth were exposed. Only these 2 parts were his weak points. Ji Tianxing wanted to kill Yi Liushui in one hit, so he had to control the flying dagger to stab his eyes. Yi Liushui also understood this. He tilted his head to the side and punched at the god-slaying flying dagger. Clang! With a crisp sound of metal clashing, the god-slaying flying dagger was sent flying by Yi Liushui. The flying dagger deviated from its original trajectory and stabbed into the ruins below. Boom! A deep pit with a radius of 10 miles was blasted out of the ruins, and mud splashed all over the place. Yi Liushui successfully blocked the attack of the flying dagger. He became more energetic and regained his confidence. Ha ha! So what if you can control a divine artifact? The defense of this divine armor is invincible. I am already in an invincible position. As he laughed maniacally, he sped up towards Ji Tianxing, raising both his fists and smashing them down. Suddenly, 2 mountain-sized golden fists descended from the sky and enveloped Ji Tianxing. At this critical moment, Ji Tianxing hurriedly used his trump card. Turbid Heaven's Secret Art. Instantly, his figure disappeared into thin air and merged with the heaven and earth within a radius of over 1,000 miles. Boom! Boom! The 2 fist auras missed their target and slammed into the ground, causing a huge explosion that shook the 9 heavens. 2 deep pits with a radius of 100 miles were blasted out of the ruins that were covered in black mud. The ground within 1,000 miles shook violently, and dozens of ravines split open like a spider web. Although Ji Tianxing had merged with the heaven and earth. As long as Yi Liushui's attack couldn't destroy the ground within 1,000 miles, he would be immortal. However, Ji Tianqing was still in great pain when the ground suffered such a terrifying attack. It was as if he had been punched twice in the abdomen. He was in severe pain, and blood flowed out of the corner of his mouth. However, he ignored his injuries and lurked between the heaven and earth, looking for an opportunity to assassinate Yi Liushui. Yi Liushui stood in the sky, in a defensive posture, and looked around with sharp eyes. He even released his divine sense to explore the ground, looking for Ji Tianqing everywhere. Of course, he found nothing. Ji Tianqing's aura was clearly in this world. However, he was nowhere to be found. Yi Liushui frowned and cursed in a cold tone. Ji Tianqing, you coward, you can't beat me. So you're hiding in your turtle shell? Weren't you very arrogant before? Aren't you the reincarnation of Kenshin, the divine and invincible? Come out if you have the guts, and fight me for 300 rounds. Don't you find it shameful to hide like this? Do you have any shame? Yi Liushui kept cursing, trying to provoke Ji Tianqing and force him to show up. However, Ji Tianqing didn't fall for it all. There wasn't even a sound. There was silence between heaven and earth, and the air seemed to be frozen. Yi Liushui walked in the sky, cursing and searching with his divine sense, and at the same time, keeping his guard up. Suddenly, a rift appeared in the sky, 3,000 meters behind him. Whoosh! A 3-inch-long beam of golden light shot out as fast as lightning. Yi Liushui sensed the approaching danger and instantly turned around, smirking as he waved his hand. Ha ha! You really can't help but attack? As long as Ji Tianqing attacked, he could follow the clues and find Ji Tianqing. Bang! The huge golden palms slammed into the golden light, causing a loud, muffled sound to ring out. The golden light was smashed into pieces, bursting out with overwhelming golden flames. Yi Liushui originally thought that the golden light was the god-slaying flying dagger. Seeing the monstrous golden flames rising into the sky, his expression changed drastically, and anger flashed in his eyes. Oh no, I've been fooled by Ji Tianqing. He immediately realized that the golden light wasn't the god-slaying flying dagger, but just a cover. As for the real god-slaying flying dagger, just as Yi Liushui thought of this, a dazzling golden light lit up in front of him. Whoosh! The golden light was only an inch long, but there was a simple and exquisite dagger in it. Only then did Yi Liushui realize that the sky 10 feet away from him had cracked open. The shrunken golden dagger had flown out from the crack and attacked him when he was unprepared. However, it was too late for him to realize all this. The god-slaying flying dagger was less than a foot away from his forehead. Even an Einerjar might not be able to dodge it. Puff! With a dull bang, the god-slaying flying dagger stabbed into Yi Liushui's forehead. In that instant, divine power that could destroy heaven and earth exploded in his head. Bang! A deafening sound reverberated in the sky. Yi Liushui's head instantly exploded. A large amount of flesh and blood, mixed with purple divine soul fragments, sprayed out from the godly armor. Yi Liushui died on the spot. The headless corpse was still wrapped in the godly armor. It fell from the sky and landed in the deep pit ruins. At this moment, a hazy shadow appeared in the sky and gradually became solid. Ji Tianqing had appeared. He looked down at the ground expressionlessly and looked at Yi Liushui's corpse. He murmured in a cold voice, "You were too complacent. You deserve to die. Although the divine artifact is powerful, it depends on who is using it." Then, he descended from the sky and landed near Yi Liushui's corpse. He waved his hand and formed a golden seal, infusing it into the godly armor. Chapter 2340. In the blink of an eye, the armor returned to its original state. Then, it turned into a fist-sized metal ball, sparkling and translucent like glass. Ji Tianqing grabbed the metal ball and shot out a beam of starfire, covering Yi Liushui's body. Whoosh! The starfire rose and quickly burned Yi Liushui's body. After a few breaths, Yi Liushui's body turned into ashes. It mixed with the soil and was difficult to tell them apart. A pitch-black interspatial ring lay quietly in the ashes. Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows, picked up the interspatial ring, and put it away. This was Yi Liushui's interspatial ring. According to the customs of the martial world, it must contain most of Yi Liushui's savings and many secrets. Ji Tianxing believed that Yi Liushui, as martial god Tianju's confidant who had been in charge of the Tianju divine nation for many years, must be extremely rich. Without guessing, there must be a huge amount of cultivation resources and countless rare treasures in the interspatial ring. But now, he didn't want to waste time counting those things. He put the metal ball into the interspatial ring and left the ruins. Whoosh! Ji Tianxing stepped into the sky and flew toward the west. As he expected, martial god Nangong hid the divine artifact at the bottom of the lake. Then, there must be a divine artifact in the lake to the east of the mountain range. Ji Tianxing was looking forward to what kind of divine artifact was hidden at the bottom of the lake. He turned into a beam of golden light and flew over the silver grassland. Soon, he saw a few badly injured martial artists in ragged clothes picking herbs on the grassland. Among them were 3 martial lords and 2 martial saints. They were all heavily injured. Ji Tianxing glanced at them. Seeing that they weren't from the Tianju divine nation, he ignored them. Soon, he crossed the silver grassland and returned to the sky above the majestic mountain range. Looking down at the mountain range, he saw a few groups of martial artists fighting fiercely under the leadership of martial saints. Obviously, those people were still fighting for cultivation resources and divine artifacts. The chaos that Ji Tianxing had caused earlier still hadn't subsided. Soon, he crossed the majestic mountain range and flew above the lush forest. Towering ancient trees grew in the vast forest, exuding an extremely dense green wood aura. Countless rare herbs grew in the forest, all of which were rare herbs. There were several batches of severely injured and miserable-looking martial artists shuttling through the sea of trees, quickly searching for medicinal herbs. Those martial artists had obviously gone through many battles and were exhausted long ago. The few groups of people were not willing to be entangled in the fight any longer. They very tacitly scattered in all directions, maintaining a safe distance between each other. If they couldn't obtain treasures and benefits, fighting. However, when Ji Tianxing flew over the sea of trees, a group of people hit the jackpot. They actually discovered a rarely seen dragon saliva fruit in a 1,000 feet tall ancient tree. Dragon fruit was Dragon's divine artifact. A divine artifact was of the world of the divine artifact. Was rare, not only a divine artifact, a divine martial of a world, Of course, it was effective for martial artists below the martial sage realm. If a martial sage consumed it, the effect would be minimal. It would be better to refine it into an elixir. Even so, the dragon fruit was one of the top treasures. It was priceless. This discovery immediately alarmed many martial artists. After picking the dragon fruit, they fled. But they had yet to escape far when they were stopped by 2 groups of martial artists. What happened next was self-evident. The 3 groups of martial artists fought fiercely in the forest to snatch the dragon fruit. The commotion caused by the battle spread far and wide, attracting more martial artists to join the battle. The originally tranquil sea of trees immediately became lively. Ji Tianxing glanced at the chaotic battlefield and left expressionlessly. Although the dragon fruit was rare, he didn't care about it. Compared to the divine artifact buried in the lake, it was insignificant. 15 minutes later, he flew 5,000 miles and arrived in the depths of the forest. In the dark green forest, there was a lake of a few thousand miles. The lake water was so clear that one could see the bottom. It formed a strong contrast with the dark green forest. However, the lake was too big. It was inevitable that there would be waves on the lake. If the lake was still, it would really be a mirror. Ji Tianxing looked around. Seeing that there was no one around, he dived into the lake. Swoosh! He dived into the cool lake water and dived to the bottom of the lake. After diving for 10,000 feet, he landed at the bottom of the lake, which was covered with sand and stones. The flat bottom of the lake was full of white cobblestones and light yellow fine sand. Tianxing shuttled to the bottom of the lake and released his divine sense to explore the ground, looking for clues. Yao Yao and I have investigated the lake before, but we didn't find anything out of the ordinary. Later, we fought with Yi Lu Shui and the others and caused the bottom of the lake to crack. Yao Yao then discovered the stone tomb at the bottom of the lake. As he searched for clues, Tianxing silently thought about how to find the stone tomb at the bottom of the lake. After 100 breaths, he had moved a few hundred miles but still did not find any clues. Therefore, he decided to dive into the depths of the ground and conduct a carpet search. But at this moment, at the bottom of the lake, 100 miles in front of him, a dull, loud noise suddenly exploded. Boom! Although it was at the bottom of the lake, the loud noise was still deafening. The bottom of the lake also shook violently, and countless sand and stones were sent flying. Someone beat us to it. Tianxing immediately frowned, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. He sped up and soon arrived at the location of the loud noise. He saw that at the bottom of the dark lake, there was a gully that was more than 10 feet wide. The turbulent lake water was crazily pouring into the gully. Tianxing hurriedly dived into the gully and dived into the depths of the ground along the cracked rock layer. After diving for 10,000 feet, he saw a 10-foot-long gap in the ground. On both sides of the gap were brown rock layers, and in the middle was a 5-colored light shield. The turbulent lake water poured down, but was blocked by the 5-colored light shield. Tianxing took a closer look and found that the defense of the light shield was not very strong. It was just an ordinary saint-level array. He used a little trick to break the array. Swoosh! His figure flashed and passed through the 5-colored light shield, and he entered an empty cave. This was a cave with a radius of a few hundred miles. The surrounding rock walls, the ground, and the roof of the cave were densely inlaid with colorful gems, each of which was the size of a wash basin. The appearance of this cave was the same as the one at the bottom of the lake. In the middle of the cave, there was also a black stone tomb with a radius of 10,000 feet. At this moment, 2 balls of divine souls and a badly injured elder were carefully observing the stone tomb, as if they were trying to figure out how to break the array. Seeing this scene, the corners of Tianxing's mouth curled up into a sneer as he silently flew over. Chapter 23:41. Tianxing really wanted to know who exactly were the 3 people who beat him to it. They knew that there was a divine artifact at the bottom of the lake, and they knew how to find the stone tomb. The 3 of them must have witnessed the previous battle. However, Tianxing remembered clearly that the only people who had appeared at the dark green lake were him, Yun Yao, and the people from Tianzhu Nation. Swoosh! He silently approached the stone tomb and stared coldly at the old man. Although the elder was badly injured and half of his body was badly mutilated, Jiang Chun recognized him. However, Tianxing recognized the old man with a single glance. He was one of the 3 sages of the Eastern Sea. The 3 sages of the East Sea? It's them? Could it be that the 3 of them were nearby when I was fighting with Yi Lu Shui and the rest? How did they end up like this? Tianxing raised his eyebrows as a trace of doubt flashed through his eyes. After a while, the 3 sages of the East Sea surrounded the stone tomb and studied it for a long time, but they still had no clue. The elder in the white robe, who only had half of his body left, muttered gloomily, "Damn it! How can the defensive array of this stone tomb be so profound? Even if we find the stone tomb hidden at the bottom of the lake, it's useless if we can't open this array." The other 2 divine souls were also anxious, but there was nothing they could do. At this moment, Tianxing appeared openly. He appeared behind the elder in the white robe and said coldly, "The 3 of you are cunning enough. Unfortunately, you are too weak to get your hands on this treasure." The sudden voice was very abrupt in the silent cave. The elder in the white robe was shocked. He turned around and looked at Tianxing cautiously. The other 2 divine souls were also facing Tianxing, shining with white light. When the elder in the white robe saw Ji Tianxing's face clearly, his face changed drastically and his eyes were filled with shock. Ji Tianxing, it's you. You're still alive? The elder in the white robe was a little confused. He had not expected this. He had already expected that Yi Luxue would be able to kill Ji Tianxing after obtaining the divine armor. The final result would definitely be that Ji Tianxing would be killed, and Yi Luxue and the others would suffer heavy casualties. They would have to find a place to retreat and recuperate. This created an opportunity for the three of them, giving them enough time to take away the treasures at the bottom of Mirror Lake. However, the white-robed old man had never imagined that the result would be the complete opposite of what he had expected. Ji Tianxing saw the white-robed old man's reaction and guessed many things. However, he didn't want to waste his breath and said in a dignified tone, "This treasure is mine. You can scram now." The old man in the white robe was ashamed and angry at the same time. He held the carved bow in his hand and shouted in a hoarse voice, "Ji Tianxing, you're going too far. We were the ones who came here first and found the stone tomb first." The fate of the three saints of the Eastern Sea was so miserable, but they didn't get any benefits at all. It wasn't easy for them to find a stone tomb that contained a divine artifact. How could they give up? Even if they had to risk their lives, they had to give it a try. Ji Tianxing didn't say anything else. He raised his hand and struck out a giant golden palm toward the white-robed old man. The white-robed old man's expression changed. His pupils constricted and he quickly dodged. However, he was too slow. Bam! With a muffled explosion, the white-robed old man was sent flying by the golden palm, crashing into the ground 10 kilometers away. He rolled on the ground for more than 10 times and finally came to a stop after crashing into a red gemstone the size of a wash basin. His chest, which was already badly mangled, had sunken deeply and dark red blood was gushing out. A miraculous scene appeared. The blood from the white-robed old man's heart soaked the entire dark red gemstone. Suddenly, it emitted a dazzling golden light. Swoosh! The dark red gemstone seemed to have a life of its own. It flashed with a faint golden light and spewed out a mighty divine power that surged into the white-robed old man's body. His broken body suddenly swelled up violently. Kacha! His limbs and body rapidly grew in size, and his bones became distorted, producing a crisp cracking sound. The indescribable pain caused the white-robed old man's body to twitch, and he let out a heart-wrenching scream. However, he didn't struggle. Instead, he didn't fear the pain. He hugged the dark red gemstone even more crazily and greedily absorbed the mighty divine power. This was because as his body expanded, his strength was also rapidly recovering. His aura became extremely violent, and his strength increased by more than 10 times. In the blink of an eye, he had turned from an old and dying martial sage to a powerful and violent martial sage at the peak of the martial sage realm. Such an unbelievable change made Ji Tianxing frown. His eyes were filled with shock. Those 5-colored gemstones have such a powerful effect. The other 2 divine souls had already fled in panic. They hadn't fled far when they noticed the white-robed old man's transformation. Seeing this, they were filled with surprise and excitement and flew back. After a while, the white-robed old man's transformation ended. He had turned into a giant that was 100 meters tall. His entire body was shining with golden light. Every move he made was overflowing with destructive power. He looked down at Ji Tianxing from above. He opened his mouth and laughed sinisterly. He. Ji Tianxing, you didn't expect this, did you? There's always a way out. I'll come back from death's door. You will die here. As he spoke, he waved his giant sword with all his might and slashed it down at Ji Tianxing from above. You want to steal my treasure? Go to hell. Ji Tianxing looked at him indifferently and said calmly, even though there are some changes, the ending will not change. With that, he raised his fists and punched the white-robed old man with all his might. Star-shattering fist. Endless starlight gushed out from his hands and formed 2 huge fist radiances that were as large as mountains. They hit the giant sword hard. Kaboom! One of the fist radiances and the sword radiance collapsed at the same time. They shattered into pieces that covered the sky and scattered in all directions. As for the other fist radiance, it struck the white-robed old man's chest and sent him flying. The white-robed old man flew 40 miles and smashed into the cave wall. The extremely hard rock wall was smashed into a huge pit with a radius of 10 miles. The surrounding area was filled with cracks. The violent and terrifying impact shook the entire cave, and countless boulders collapsed from the ceiling. The white-robed old man lay in the ruins in a sorry state. Half of his body was buried by boulders and mud. The light on his body dimmed, and dark red blood kept spurting out. Slowly lowering his head to look at his chest, he saw a huge bloody hole that went straight through his chest. His chest had been pierced through, and his internal organs were also shattered. The vitality of his body was quickly draining away, and his body gradually became cold. As the golden light faded, his body shrank and returned to its original state. The white-robed old man's physical body was destroyed. Even his soul was severely injured. It escaped from his body weakly and flew into the distance.